Welcome to your ultimate sleep escape. In the next few moments, you'll embark on a journey with Hercule Poirot as we delve into Agatha Christie's Murder on the Links, specially adapted to lull you into deep, restorative sleep. You clicked for peace, and that's exactly what you'll get. Imagine yourself drifting off, not to jarring noise, but to the gentle unraveling of a classic mystery. Why would a man be found dead on a French golf course, only for his body to be inexplicably moved? And how can a tale of deceit and detection be the key to unlocking your most peaceful night's rest? Here, we transform intricate plots into calming whispers, turning every twist into a step closer to slumber. Forget restless nights. This isn't just a story, it's a personalized pathway to tranquility, crafted for optimal relaxation and deep sleep. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment about your favorite classic mystery, and subscribe for more sleep-inducing stories. Chapter 1: A Fellow Traveler. I recall a well-known anecdote about a young writer. Determined to make his stories beginning forceful and original, hoping to captivate even the most jaded editors, he wrote, "Hell," said the Duchess. Strangely enough, my own tale begins in much the same way. Only, the lady who uttered the exclamation was not a duchess. It was a day in early June. I had been conducting business in Paris and was returning to London on the morning train. There, I was still sharing rooms with my old friend, the Belgian ex-detective, Hercule Poirot. The Calais Express was remarkably empty. In fact, my compartment held only one other traveler. I had left my hotel rather hurriedly, and was busy ensuring I had gathered all my belongings when the train started. Up until then, I had barely noticed my companion. But now, I was abruptly reminded of her presence. Jumping up, she lowered the window and poked her head out. A moment later, she pulled it back in, with the brief, forceful exclamation, "Hell! Now, I am old-fashioned. I believe a woman should be womanly. I have no patience for the modern high-strung girl who dances all night, smokes constantly, and uses language that would make a dock worker blush." I looked up, frowning slightly, at a pretty, impudent face topped by a jaunty little red hat. Thick black curls hid each ear. I judged her to be little more than 17, but her face was covered with powder, and her lips were impossibly scarlet. Undeterred, she met my gaze and made an expressive grimace. "Dear me, we've shocked the kind gentleman," she remarked to an imaginary audience. "I apologize for my language. Most unladylike, and all that, but oh Lord, there's reason enough for it. Do you know I've lost my only sister?" "Really?" I said politely. "How unfortunate." "He disapproves," the lady declared. "He disapproves utterly of me and my sister, which last is unfair, because he hasn't seen her." I opened my mouth, but she cut me off. "Say no more. Nobody loves me. I shall go into the garden and eat worms. Boo-hoo. I am crushed." She buried herself behind a large, humorous French newspaper. In a minute or two, I saw her eyes stealthily peeping at me over the top. Despite myself, I couldn't help but smile. A moment later, she tossed the paper aside and burst into a merry peal of laughter. "I knew you weren't such a mutt as you looked," she cried. Her laughter was so infectious that I couldn't help joining in, though I hardly cared for the word mutt. The girl was certainly everything I most disliked, but that was no reason to make myself ridiculous with my attitude. I prepared to relax my guard. After all, she was decidedly pretty. "There. Now we're friends," declared the minx. "Say you're sorry about my sister." "I am desolated." "That's a good boy." "Let me finish. I was going to add that, although I am desolated, I can manage to put up with her absence very well." I made a little bow. But this most unpredictable of damsels frowned and shook her head. "Cut it out. I prefer the dignified disapproval act." "Oh, your face." "Not one of us," it said. "And you were right, though, mind you, it's pretty hard to tell nowadays. Not everyone can distinguish between a showgirl and a duchess. There now, I believe I've shocked you again. You've been dug out of the backwoods, you have. Not that I mind that. We could use a few more of your sort. I just hate a fellow who gets fresh. It makes me mad." She shook her head vigorously. "What are you like when you're mad?" I inquired with a smile. "A regular little devil. Don't care what I say, or what I do, either. I nearly did a chap in once. Yes, really. He'd have deserved it too. Italian blood, I've got. I shall get into trouble one of these days." "Well," I pleaded, "don't get mad with me." "I shan't. I like you, did the first moment I saw you. But you looked so disapproving that I never thought we'd make friends." "Well, we have. Tell me something about yourself." "I'm an actress." "No, not the kind you're thinking of, lunching at the Savoy covered with jewelry, with their photograph in every paper saying how much they love Madame So-and-so's face cream. I've been on the boards since I was 6, tumbling." "I beg your pardon," I said, puzzled. "Haven't you seen child acrobats?" "Oh, I understand. I'm American-born, but I've spent most of my life in England. We have a new show now." "We." "My sister and I. A sort of song and dance, a bit of patter, and a dash of the old business thrown in. It's quite a new idea, and it's a hit every time. There's money to be made." My new acquaintance leaned forward and spoke volubly, many of her terms quite unintelligible to me. Yet, I found myself increasingly interested in her. She seemed such a curious blend of child and woman. Though perfectly worldly wise and capable, as she put it, of taking care of herself, there was something strangely naive in her single-minded approach to life and her whole-hearted determination to make good. This glimpse into a world unknown to me was not without its charm, and I enjoyed seeing her vivid little face light up as she talked. We passed through Amiens. The name awakened many memories. My companion seemed to intuitively know what was on my mind. "Thinking of the war?" I nodded. "You were through it, I suppose?" "Pretty well. I was wounded once, and after the Somme, they invalided me out completely. I had a half-formed army job for a bit. I'm a sort of private secretary now to an MP. My, that's brainy." "No, it isn't. There's really awfully little to do. Usually a couple of hours every day sees me through. It's dull work too. In fact, I don't know what I'd do if I hadn't got something to fall back upon." "Don't say you collect bugs." "No. I share rooms with a very interesting man. He's a Belgian, an ex-detective. He's set up as a private detective in London, and he's doing extraordinarily well. He's really a marvelous little man. Time and again he has proven to be right where the official police have failed." My companion listened with widening eyes. "Isn't that interesting, now? I just adore crime. I go to all the mystery movies. And when there's a murder, I just devour the papers." "Do you remember the Styles case?" I asked. "Let me see, was that the old lady who was poisoned? Somewhere down in Essex?" I nodded. "That was Poirot's first big case. Undoubtedly, but for him, the murderer would have escaped scot-free. It was the most wonderful bit of detective work." Warming to my subject, I recounted the main points of the affair, building up to the triumphant and unexpected ending. The girl listened spellbound. In fact, we were so absorbed that the train pulled into Calais station before we realized it. "My goodness gracious me!" cried my companion. "Where's my powder puff?" She proceeded to liberally apply powder to her face, then used a stick of lip salve on her lips, observing the effect in a small pocket mirror, betraying not the faintest sign of self-consciousness. I say, I hesitated. I dare say it's cheeky of me, but why do all that? The girl paused in her operations and stared at me with undisguised surprise. "It isn't as though you weren't so pretty that you can afford to do without it," I said stammeringly. "My dear boy, I have to do it. All the girls do. Do you think I want to look like a little country bumpkin?" She took one last look in the mirror, smiled approvingly, and put it and her vanity box away in her bag. "That's better. Keeping up appearances is a bit of a chore, I grant, but if a girl respects herself, it's up to her not to let herself get slack." To this essentially moral sentiment, I had no reply. A point of view makes a great difference. I secured a couple of porters, and we alighted on the platform. My companion held out her hand. "Goodbye, and I'll mind my language better in future." "Oh, but surely you'll let me look after you on the boat?" "May not be on the boat. I have to see whether that sister of mine got aboard after all, anywhere. But thanks all the same." "Oh, but we're going to meet again, surely?" I hesitated. "I want to meet your sister." We both laughed. "That's really nice of you. I'll tell her what you said. But I don't fancy we'll meet again. You've been very good to me on the journey, especially after I spoke to you so boldly. But what your face expressed at first is quite true. I'm not your kind, and that brings trouble. I know that well enough." Her face changed. For a moment, all the light-hearted gaiety died out of it. It looked angry, revengeful. "So goodbye," she finished, in a lighter tone. "Aren't you even going to tell me your name?" I cried, as she turned away. She looked over her shoulder. A dimple appeared in each cheek. She was like a lovely picture by Giraud. "Cinderella," she said, and laughed. But little did I think when and how I would see Cinderella again. Chapter 2: An Appeal for Help. It was 5 minutes past 9 when I entered our sitting room for breakfast the following morning. My friend Poirot, punctual as ever, was just tapping the shell of his second egg. He beamed upon me as I entered. "You have slept well, yes? You have recovered from the terrible crossing? It is a marvel. You are almost on time this morning. Pardon, but your tie is not symmetrical. Permit me to rearrange it. I've described Hercule Poirot elsewhere. An extraordinary little man. 5 feet 4 inches tall, an egg-shaped head tilted slightly to one side, eyes that shone green when he was excited, a stiff military mustache, and an immense air of dignity. He was neat and elegant in appearance. He had an absolute passion for neatness of any kind. To see an ornament set crooked, a speck of dust, or a slight disarray in one's attire was torture to the little man until he could ease his feelings by fixing it. Order and method were his gods. He had a certain disdain for tangible evidence, such as footprints and cigarette ash, and would maintain that, taken by themselves, they would never enable a detective to solve a problem. Then he would tap his egg-shaped head with absurd complacency, and remark with great satisfaction, "The true work, it is done from within. The little grey cells, remember always the little grey cells, mon ami." I slipped into my seat and remarked idly, in answer to Poirot's greeting, that an hour's sea passage from Calais to Dover could hardly be called terrible. Poirot waved his egg spoon, vigorously refuting my remark. "Not at all. If for an hour one experiences sensations and emotions of the most terrible, one has lived many hours. Does not one of your English poets say that time is counted, not by hours, but by heartbeats? I fancy Browning was referring to something more romantic than seasickness, though. Because he was an Englishman, an islander to whom the Channel was nothing. Oh, you English! With us, it is different. Picture to yourself that a lady of my acquaintance, at the beginning of the war, fled to Ostend. There she had a terrible nervous crisis. Impossible to escape further, except by crossing the sea. And she had a horror, but a horror, of the sea. What was she to do? Daily, the Germans were drawing nearer. Imagine the terrible situation. What did she do? I inquired, curiously. Fortunately, her husband was a practical man. He was also very calm. The nervous crises did not affect him. He simply carried her aboard. Naturally, when she reached England she was prostrate, but she still breathed. Poirot shook his head seriously. I composed my face as best I could. Suddenly he stiffened and pointed a dramatic finger at the toast rack. "Ah, for example, this is too much," he cried. "What is it?" "This piece of toast. You don't notice it." He whipped the offender out of the rack and held it up for me to examine. "Is it square?" "No." "Is it a triangle?" Again, "No." "Is it even round?" "No." "Is it of any shape remotely pleasing to the eye?" "What symmetry do we have here?" "None." "It's cut from a cottage loaf," I explained soothingly. Poirot threw me a withering glance. "What intelligence my friend Hastings has!" he exclaimed sarcastically. "Do you not understand that I have forbidden such a loaf, a haphazard and shapeless loaf, that no baker should permit himself to bake? I endeavored to distract his mind. Anything interesting come by post?" Poirot shook his head with a dissatisfied air. "I have not yet examined my letters, but nothing of interest arrives nowadays. The great criminals, the criminals of method, they do not exist. The cases I have been employed upon lately were banal to the last degree. In truth, I am reduced to recovering lost lapdogs for fashionable ladies. The last problem that presented any interest was that intricate little affair of the Yardley diamond, and that was, how many months ago, my friend?" He shook his head despondently, and I roared with laughter. "Cheer up, Poirot, the luck will change. Open your letters. For all you know, there may be a great case looming on the horizon." Poirot smiled, and taking up the neat little letter opener with which he opened his correspondence, he slit the tops of the several envelopes that lay by his plate. "A bill. Another bill. It is that I grow extravagant in my old age. Aha! A note from Jap. Yes." My ears perked up. The Scotland Yard inspector had more than once introduced us to an interesting case. He merely thanks me, in his fashion, for a little point in the Aberystwyth case on which I was able to set him right. I am delighted to have been of service to him. "How does he thank you?" I asked curiously, for I knew my Jap. "He is kind enough to say that I am a wonderful sport for my age, and that he was glad to have had the chance of letting me in on the case." This was so typical of Jap that I could not suppress a chuckle. Poirot continued to read his correspondence placidly. A suggestion that I should give a lecture to our local Boy Scouts. "The Countess of Forfenach will be obliged if I will call and see her. Another lapdog, no doubt. And now for the last." Ah! I looked up, quick to notice the change of tone. Poirot was reading attentively. In a minute, he tossed the sheet over to me. "This is out of the ordinary, my friend. Read for yourself." The letter was written on a foreign type of paper, in a bold, characteristic hand. Villa Geneviève Mer Linville sur Mer France. Dear Sir, I am in need of the services of a detective and, for reasons which I will give you later, do not wish to call in the official police. I have heard of you from several quarters, and all reports go to show that you are not only a man of decided ability, but one who also knows how to be discreet. I do not wish to trust details to the post, but, on account of a secret I possess, I live in daily fear of my life. I am convinced that the danger is imminent, and therefore I beg that you will lose no time in crossing to France. I will send a car to meet you at Calais if you will wire me when you are arriving. I shall be obliged if you will drop all cases you have on hand, and devote yourself solely to my interests. I am prepared to pay any compensation necessary. I shall probably need your services for a considerable period of time, as it may be necessary for you to go out to Santiago, where I spent several years of my life. I shall be content for you to name your own fee, assuring you once more that the matter is urgent. Yours faithfully P. T. Renauld. Below the signature was a hastily scrawled line, almost illegible. For God's sake, come. I handed the letter back with quickened pulses. At last, I said, here is something distinctly out of the ordinary. Yes, indeed, said Poirot contemplatively. You will go, of course, I continued. Poirot nodded. He was thinking deeply. Finally, he seemed to make up his mind and glanced up at the clock. His face was very grave. See, my friend, there is no time to lose. The Continental Express leaves Victoria at 11 o'clock. Do not worry yourself. There is plenty of time. We can allow 10 minutes for discussion. You accompany me, don't you? Well, you told me yourself that your employer did not need you for the next few weeks. Oh, that's all right. But this Mr. Renauld hints strongly that his business is private. Nonsense. I will manage Mr. Renauld. By the way, I seem to know the name. There's a well-known South American millionaire fellow. His name's Renauld. I don't know whether it could be the same. But without doubt, that explains the mention of Santiago. Santiago is in Chile, and Chile is in South America. Ah, but we progress finely. Dear me, Poirot, I said, my excitement rising. I smell some goodly money in this. If we succeed, we shall make our fortunes. Do not be too sure of that, my friend. A rich man and his money are not so easily parted. I myself have seen a well-known millionaire turn out a tramful of people to search for a dropped halfpenny. I acknowledged the wisdom of this. In any case, continued Poirot, it is not the money which attracts me here. Certainly, it will be pleasant to have carte blanche in our investigations. One can be sure that way of wasting no time, but it is something a little bizarre in this problem which arouses my interest. You remarked the postscript? How did it strike you? I considered it. Clearly, he wrote the letter keeping himself well in hand, but at the end his self-control snapped, and, on the impulse of the moment, he scrawled those 4 desperate words. But my friend shook his head energetically. You are in error. Do you not see that while the ink of the signature is nearly black, that of the postscript is quite pale? Well, I said, puzzled. My goodness, my friend, but use your little gray cells. Is it not obvious? Mr. Renauld wrote his letter. Without blotting it, he reread it carefully. Then, not on impulse, but deliberately, he added those last words, and blotted the sheet. But why? Of course, so that it should produce the effect upon me that it has upon you. What? But, yes, to make sure of my coming. He reread the letter and was dissatisfied. It was not strong enough. He paused, and then added softly, his eyes shining with that green light that always betokened inward excitement. And so, my friend, since that postscript was added, not on impulse, but soberly, in cold blood, the urgency is very great, and we must reach him as soon as possible. Merlinville, I murmured thoughtfully. I've heard of it, I think. Poirot nodded. It is a quiet little place, but chic. It lies about midway between Boulogne and Calais. It is rapidly becoming fashionable. Rich English people who wish to be quiet are taking it up. Mr. Renauld has a house in England, I suppose. Yes, in Rutland Gate, as far as I remember. Also a big place in the country, somewhere in Hertfordshire. But I really know very little about him. He doesn't do much socially. I believe he has large South American interests in the city, and has spent most of his life out in Chile and Argentina. Well, we shall hear all details from the man himself. Come, let us pack. A small suitcase each, and then a taxi to Victoria. And the Countess? I inquired with a smile. Ah, I don't care. Her case was certainly not interesting. Why so sure of that? Because in that case she would have come, not written. A woman cannot wait. Always remember that, Hastings. 11 o'clock saw our departure from Victoria on our way to Dover. Before starting, Poirot had dispatched a telegram to Mr. Renauld giving the time of our arrival at Calais. I'm surprised you haven't invested in a few bottles of some seasickness remedy, Poirot, I observed maliciously, as I recalled our conversation at breakfast. My friend, who was anxiously scanning the weather, turned a reproachful face upon me. Is it that you have forgotten the most excellent method of Laverguire? His system, I practice it always. One balances oneself, if you remember, turning the head from left to right, breathing in and out, counting 6 between each breath. I demurred. You'll be rather tired of balancing yourself and counting 6 by the time you get to Santiago, or Buenos Aires, or wherever it is you land. What an idea! You do not picture to yourself that I shall go to Santiago. Mr. Renauld suggests it in his letter. He did not know the methods of Hercule Poirot. I do not run to and fro, making journeys, and agitating myself. My work is done from within, here. He tapped his forehead significantly. As usual, this remark roused my argumentative faculty. It's all very well, Poirot, but I think you are falling into the habit of despising certain things too much. A fingerprint has sometimes led to the arrest and conviction of a murderer, and has, without doubt, hanged more than one innocent man, remarked Poirot dryly. But surely the study of fingerprints and footprints, cigarette ash, different kinds of mud, and other clues that comprise the minute observation of details, all these are of vital importance? But certainly. I have never said otherwise. The trained observer, the expert, without doubt he is useful. But the others, Hercule Poirot, they are above the experts. To them the experts bring the facts. Their business is the method of the crime, its logical deduction, the proper sequence and order of the facts. Above all, the true psychology of the case. You have hunted the fox, yes. I have hunted a bit now and again, I said, rather bewildered by this abrupt change of subject. Why? Well then, this hunting of the fox, you need the dogs, no? Hounds, I corrected gently. Yes, of course. But yet, Poirot wagged his finger at me. You did not descend from your horse and run along the ground smelling with your nose and uttering loud ow-ows? Despite myself, I laughed immoderately. Poirot nodded in a satisfied manner. So, you leave the work of the hounds to the hounds. Yet you demand that I, Hercule Poirot, should make myself ridiculous by lying down, possibly on damp grass, to study hypothetical footprints, and should scoop up cigarette ash when I do not know one kind from the other. Remember the Plymouth Express mystery. The good Jap departed to make a survey of the railway line. When he returned, I, without having moved from my apartments, was able to tell him exactly what he had found. So you are of the opinion that Jap wasted his time? Not at all, since his evidence confirmed my theory. But I should have wasted my time if I had gone. It is the same with so-called experts. Remember the handwriting testimony in the Cavendish case. One counsel's questioning brings out testimony as to the resemblances, the defense brings evidence to show dissimilarity. All the language is very technical, and the result, what we all knew in the first place. The writing was very like that of John Cavendish, and the psychological mind is faced with the question, why? Because it was actually his? Or because someone wished us to think it was his? I answered that question, my friend, and answered it correctly. And Poirot, having effectively silenced, if not convinced me, leaned back with a satisfied air. On the boat, I knew better than to disturb my friend's solitude. The weather was gorgeous, and the sea as smooth as the proverbial millpond, so I was hardly surprised to hear that Laverguyre's method had once more justified itself when a smiling Poirot joined me on disembarking at Calais. A disappointment was in store for us, as no car had been sent to meet us, but Poirot put this down to his telegram having been delayed in transit. Since it is carte blanche, we will hire a car, he said cheerfully, and a few minutes later saw us creaking and jolting along in the most ramshackle of automobiles that ever plied for hire, in the direction of Merlinville. My spirits were at their highest. What gorgeous air! I exclaimed. This promises to be a delightful trip. For you, yes. For me, I have work to do, remember, at our journey's end. Bah! I said cheerfully. You will discover everything, ensure this Mr. Renaud's safety, run the would-be assassins to earth, and all will finish in a blaze of glory. You are optimistic, my friend. Yes, I feel absolutely assured of success. Are you not the one and only Hercule Poirot? But my little friend did not rise to the bait. He was observing me gravely. You are what the Scottish people call fey, Hastings. It presages disaster. Nonsense. At any rate, you do not share my feelings. No, but I am afraid. Afraid of what? I do not know. But I have a premonition, a je ne sais quoi. He spoke so gravely that I was impressed despite myself. I have a feeling, he said slowly, that this is going to be a big affair, a long, troublesome problem that will not be easy to work out. I would have questioned him further, but we were just coming into the little town of Merlinville, and we slowed up to inquire the way to the Villa Geneviève. Straight on, sir, through the town. The Villa Geneviève is about half a mile on the other side. You cannot miss it. A big villa, overlooking the sea. We thanked our informant and drove on, leaving the town behind. A fork in the road brought us to a second halt. A peasant was trudging towards us, and we waited for him to come up to us in order to ask the way again. There was a tiny villa standing right by the road, but it was too small and dilapidated to be the one we wanted. As we waited, its gate swung open and a girl came out. The peasant was passing us now, and the driver leaned forward from his seat and asked for directions. The Villa Geneviève? Just a few steps up this road to the right, sir. You could see it if it were not for the curve. The chauffeur thanked him and started the car again. My eyes were fascinated by the girl who still stood, with one hand on the gate, watching us. I am an admirer of beauty, and here was one whom nobody could have passed without remark. very tall, with the proportions of a young goddess, her uncovered golden head gleaming in the sunlight. I swore to myself that she was one of the most beautiful girls I had ever seen. As we swung up the rough road, I turned my head to look after her. "By Jove, Poirot," I exclaimed. "Did you see that young goddess?" Poirot raised his eyebrows. "It begins," he murmured. "Already you have seen a goddess. But, hang it all, wasn't she?" "Possibly. I did not notice the fact." "Surely you noticed her?" "My friend, two people rarely see the same thing. You, for instance, saw a goddess. He hesitated. "Yes. I saw only a girl with anxious eyes," said Poirot gravely. But at that moment, we drew up at a big green gate, and simultaneously, we both uttered an exclamation. Before it stood an imposing police sergeant. He held up his hand to bar our way. "You cannot pass, sirs." "But we wish to see Mr. Renauld," I cried. "We have an appointment. This is his villa, isn't it?" "Yes, sir, but—" Poirot leaned forward. "But what?" "Mr. Renauld was murdered this morning." Chapter 3 At the Villa Geneviève. In a moment, Poirot had leapt from the car, his eyes blazing with excitement. He caught the man by the shoulder. "What is that you say? Murdered? When? How?" The police sergeant drew himself up. "I cannot answer any questions, monsieur." "True. I understand." Poirot reflected for a minute. "The commissary of police, he is no doubt within?" "Yes, monsieur." Poirot took out a card and scribbled a few words on it. "Voilà. Will you have the goodness to see that this card is sent in to the commissary at once?" The man took it and, turning his head over his shoulder, whistled. In a few seconds, a comrade joined him and was handed Poirot's message. There was a wait of some minutes, and then a short, stout man with a huge mustache came bustling down to the gate. The police sergeant saluted and stood aside. "My dear Monsieur Poirot," cried the newcomer, "I am delighted to see you. Your arrival is most opportune." Poirot's face had lighted up. "Monsieur Bex, this is indeed a pleasure." He turned to me. "This is an English friend of mine, Captain Hastings, Monsieur Lucien Bex." The commissary and I bowed to each other ceremoniously. Then Monsieur Bex turned once more to Poirot. "My old friend, I have not seen you since 1909, that time in Ostend. I heard that you had left the force." "So I have. I run a private business in London." "And you say you have information to give which may assist us? Possibly you know it already. You were aware that I had been sent for?" "No." "By whom?" "The dead man. It seems he knew an attempt was going to be made on his life. Unfortunately, he sent for me too late." "Good heavens!" ejaculated the Frenchman. "So he foresaw his own murder? That upsets our theories considerably. But come inside." He held the gate open, and we began walking towards the house. Monsieur Bex continued to talk. "The examining magistrate, Monsieur Hautet, must hear of this at once. He has just finished examining the scene of the crime and is about to begin his interrogations. A charming man. You will like him. Most sympathetic. Original in his methods, but an excellent judge." "When was the crime committed?" asked Poirot. "The body was discovered this morning about 9 o'clock. Madame Renaud's evidence, and that of the doctors, goes to show that death must have occurred about 2 a.m. But enter, I beg of you." We had arrived at the steps which led up to the front door of the villa. In the hall, another police sergeant was sitting. He rose at sight of the commissary. "Where is Monsieur Hautet now?" inquired the latter. "In the salon, monsieur." Monsieur Bex opened a door to the left of the hall, and we passed in. Monsieur Hotet and his clerk were sitting at a big round table. They looked up as we entered. The commissary introduced us and explained our presence. Monsieur Hotet, the examining magistrate, was a tall, gaunt man, with piercing dark eyes, and a neatly cut grey beard, which he had a habit of caressing as he talked. Standing by the mantelpiece was an elderly man, with slightly stooping shoulders, who was introduced to us as Dr. Durand. "Most extraordinary," remarked Monsieur Hotet, as the commissary finished speaking. "You have the letter here, monsieur?" Poirot handed it to him, and the magistrate read it. He speaks of a secret. What a pity he was not more explicit. We are much indebted to you, Monsieur Poirot. I hope you will do us the honor of assisting us in our investigations. Or are you obliged to return to London? Monsieur le Juge, I propose to remain. I did not arrive in time to prevent my client's death, but I feel myself bound in honor to discover the assassin. The magistrate bowed. These sentiments do you honor. Also, no doubt, Madame Renauld will wish to retain your services. We are expecting Monsieur Giraud from the Charité in Paris any moment, and I am sure that you and he will be able to give each other mutual assistance in your investigations. In the meantime, I hope that you will do me the honor to be present at my interrogations, and I need hardly say that if there is any assistance you require, it is at your disposal. I thank you, monsieur. You will understand that at present I am completely in the dark. I know nothing whatever. Monsieur Hotet nodded to the commissary, and the latter took up the tale. This morning, the old servant Françoise, on descending to start her work, found the front door ajar. Feeling a momentary alarm as to burglars, she looked into the dining room, but seeing the silver was safe, she thought no more about it, concluding that her master had, without doubt, risen early and gone for a stroll. Pardon, monsieur, for interrupting, but was that a common practice of his? No, it was not, but old Françoise has the common idea as regards the English, that they are mad, and liable to do the most unpredictable things at any moment. Going to call her mistress as usual, a younger maid, Leonie, was horrified to discover her gagged and bound. Almost at the same moment, news was brought that Monsieur Renaud's body had been discovered, stone dead, stabbed in the back. Where? That is one of the most extraordinary features of the case, Monsieur Poirot. The body was lying, face downwards, in an open grave. What? Yes. The pit was freshly dug, just a few yards outside the boundary of the villa grounds. And he had been dead. How long? Dr. Durand answered this. I examined the body this morning at 10 o'clock. Death must have taken place at least 7, and possibly 10 hours previously. That fixes it at between midnight and 3 a.m. Exactly, and Madame Renaud's evidence places it at after 2 a.m., which narrows the field still further. Death must have been instantaneous, and naturally could not have been self-inflicted. Poirot nodded, and the commissary resumed. Madame Renauld was hastily freed from the cords that bound her by the horrified servants. She was in a terrible condition of weakness, almost unconscious from the pain of her bonds. It appears that 2 masked men entered the bedroom, gagged and bound her, whilst forcibly abducting her husband. This we know second-hand from the servants. On hearing the tragic news, she fell at once into an alarming state of agitation. On arrival, Dr. Durand immediately prescribed a sedative, and we have not yet been able to question her. But without doubt she will awake more calm, and be equal to bearing the strain of the interrogation. The commissary paused. And the residents of the house, monsieur? There is old Françoise, the housekeeper. She lived for many years with the former owners of the Villa Geneviève. Then there are 2 young girls, sisters, Denise and Leonie Allard. Their home is in Merlinville, and they come of the most respectable parents. Then there is the chauffeur whom Monsieur Renauld brought over from England with him, but he is away on a holiday. Finally, there are Madame Renauld and her son, Monsieur Jacques Renauld. He, too, is away from home at present. Poirot bowed his head. Monsieur Hautet spoke. Marchaud. The police sergeant appeared. Bring in the woman, Françoise. The man saluted and disappeared. In a moment or two he returned, escorting the frightened Françoise. Your name is Françoise Hérichet? Yes, monsieur. You have been a long time in service at the Villa Geneviève? 11 years with Madame la Vicomtesse. Then when she sold the villa this spring, I consented to remain on with the English lord. Never did I imagine. The magistrate cut her short. No doubt, no doubt. Now, Françoise, in this matter of the front door, whose business was it to fasten it at night? Mine, monsieur. Always I saw to it myself. And last night I fastened it as usual. You are sure of that? I swear it by the blessed saints, monsieur. What time would that be? The same time as usual, 10:30, monsieur. What about the rest of the household? Had they gone up to bed? Madame had retired some time before. Denise and Léonie went up with me. Monsieur was still in his study. Then, if anyone unfastened the door afterwards, it must have been Monsieur Renauld himself? Françoise shrugged her broad shoulders. What should he do that for? With robbers and assassins passing every minute. A nice idea. Monsieur was not a fool. It is not as though he had had to let that lady out. The magistrate interrupted sharply. That lady? What lady do you mean? Why, the lady who came to see him. Had a lady been to see him that evening? But yes, monsieur, and many other evenings as well. Who was she? Did you know her? A rather cunning look spread over the woman's face. How should I know who it was? She grumbled. I did not let her in last night. Aha! Roared the examining magistrate, bringing his hand down with a bang on the table. You would trifle with the police, would you? I demand that you tell me at once the name of this woman who came to visit Monsieur Renauld in the evenings. The police, grumbled Françoise. Never did I think that I should be mixed up with the police. But I know well enough who she was. It was Madame Daubreuil. The commissary uttered an exclamation and leaned forward as though in utter astonishment. Madame Daubreuil, from the Villa Marguerite just down the road? That is what I said, monsieur. Oh, she is a pretty one, that one. The old woman tossed her head scornfully. Madame Daubreuil, murmured the commissary. Impossible. There, grumbled Françoise. That is all you get for telling the truth. Not at all, said the examining magistrate soothingly. We were surprised, that is all. Madame Daubreuil then, and Monsieur Renauld, they were. He paused delicately. It was that, no doubt. How should I know? But what will you? Monsieur, he was an English lord, very rich, and Madame Daubreuil, she was poor, that one, and very chic for all that she lives so quietly with her daughter. No doubt of it, she has had her history. She is no longer young, but my word, I who speak to you have seen the men's heads turn after her as she goes down the street. Besides, lately, she has had more money to spend, all the town knows it. The little economies, they are at an end. And Françoise shook her head with an air of unalterable certainty. Monsieur Hautet stroked his beard reflectively. And Madame Renauld? He asked at length. How did she take this friendship? Françoise shrugged her shoulders. She was always most amiable, most polite. One would say that she suspected nothing. But all the same, is it not so, the heart suffers, monsieur? Day by day, I have watched Madame grow paler and thinner. She was not the same woman who arrived here a month ago. Monsieur, too, has changed. He also has had his worries. One could see that he was on the brink of a nervous crisis. And who could wonder, with an affair conducted in such a fashion. No reticence, no discretion. English style, no doubt. I bounded indignantly in my seat, but the examining magistrate was continuing his questions, undistracted by side issues. You say that Monsieur Renauld had not to let Madame Daubreuil out? Had she left, then? Yes, monsieur. I heard them come out of the study and go to the door. Monsieur said good night, and shut the door after her. What time was that? About 25 minutes after 10, monsieur. Do you know when Monsieur Renauld went to bed? I heard him come up about 10 minutes after we did. The stair creaks so that one hears everyone who goes up and down. And that is all? You heard no sound of disturbance during the night? Nothing whatever, monsieur. Which of the servants came down first in the morning? I did, monsieur. At once I saw the door swinging open. What about the other downstairs windows? Were they all fastened? Every one of them. There was nothing suspicious or out of place anywhere. Good, Françoise, you can go. The old woman shuffled towards the door. On the threshold, she looked back. I will tell you one thing, monsieur. That Madame Daubreuil, she is a bad one. Oh yes, one woman knows about another. She is a bad one, remember that. And, shaking her head wisely, Françoise left the room. Léonie Hullard, called the magistrate. Léonie appeared dissolved in tears, and inclined to be hysterical. Monsieur Hautet dealt with her deftly. Her evidence was mainly concerned with the discovery of her mistress gagged and bound, of which she gave rather an exaggerated account. She, like Françoise, had heard nothing during the night. Her sister, Denise, succeeded her. She agreed that her master had changed greatly of late. Every day he became more and more morose. He ate less. He was always depressed. But Denise had her own theory. No doubt it was the mafia he had on his track. 2 masked men. Who else could it be? A terrible society that. It is of course possible, said the magistrate smoothly. Now, my girl, was it you who admitted Madame Daubreuil to the house last night? Not last night, monsieur, the night before. But Françoise has just told us that Madame Daubreuil was here last night. No, monsieur. A lady did come to see Monsieur Renauld last night, but it was not Madame Daubreuil. Surprised, the magistrate insisted, but the girl held firm. She knew Madame Daubreuil perfectly by sight. This lady was dark also, but shorter and much younger. Nothing could shake her statement. Have you ever seen this lady before? Never, monsieur. And then the girl added diffidently, but I think she was English. English? Yes, monsieur. She asked for Monsieur Renauld in quite good French, but the accent, one can always tell it, no? Besides, when they came out of the study, they were speaking in English. Did you hear what they said? Could you understand it, I mean? I speak English very well, said Denise with pride. The lady was speaking too fast for me to catch what she said, but I heard Monsieur's last words as he opened the door for her. She paused, and then repeated carefully and laboriously, Yes, yes, but for God's sake go now. Yes, yes, but for God's sake go now, repeated the magistrate. He dismissed Denise and, after a moment or two for consideration, recalled Françoise. To her, he put the question as to whether she had not made a mistake in fixing the night of Madame Daubreuil's visit. Françoise, however, proved unexpectedly obstinate. It was last night that Madame Daubreuil had come. Without a doubt, it was her. Denise wished to make herself interesting, that's all. So she had cooked up this fine tale about a strange lady. Airing her knowledge of English too. Probably Monsieur had never spoken that sentence in English at all, and even if he had, it proved nothing, for Madame Daubreuil spoke English perfectly, and generally used that language when talking to Monsieur and Madame Renauld. You see, Monsieur Jacques, the son of Monsieur, was usually here, and he spoke French very badly. The magistrate did not insist. Instead, he inquired about the chauffeur, and learned that only yesterday, Monsieur Renauld had declared that he was not likely to use the car, and that masters might just as well take a holiday. A perplexed frown was beginning to gather between Poirot's eyes. "What is it?" I whispered. He shook his head impatiently and asked a question. "Pardon, Monsieur Bex, but no doubt Monsieur Renauld could drive the car himself?" The commissary looked over at Françoise, and the old woman replied promptly, "No, Monsieur did not drive himself." Poirot's frown deepened. "I wish you would tell me what is worrying you," I said impatiently. "Do you not see? In his letter, Monsieur Renauld speaks of sending the car for me to Calais." "Perhaps he meant a hired car," I suggested. "Doubtless that is so. But why hire a car when you have one of your own? Why choose yesterday to send away the chauffeur on a holiday, suddenly, at a moment's notice? Was it that for some reason he wanted him out of the way before we arrived?" Chapter 4. The letter signed, Bella. Françoise had left the room. The magistrate thoughtfully drummed on the table. "Monsieur Bex," he said at length, "we have directly conflicting testimony here. Which are we to believe, Françoise or Denise?" "Denise," said the commissary decidedly. "It was she who let the visitor in. Françoise is old and obstinate, and has clearly taken a dislike to Madame Daubreuil. Besides, our own information suggests that Renauld was involved with another woman." "Good heavens!" cried Monsieur Hotet. "We've forgotten to tell Monsieur Poirot about that." He searched amongst the papers on the table, and finally handed the one he was looking for to my friend. "This letter, Monsieur Poirot, we found in the pocket of the dead man's overcoat." Poirot took it and unfolded it. It was somewhat worn and crumbled, and written in English in a rather unformed hand. "My dearest one, why have you not written for so long? You do love me still, don't you? Your letters lately have been so different, cold and strange, and now this long silence. It makes me afraid. If you were to stop loving me. But that's impossible. What a silly kid I am, always imagining things. But if you did stop loving me, I don't know what I should do. Kill myself perhaps. I couldn't live without you. Sometimes I fancy another woman is coming between us. Let her look out, that's all, and you too. I'd as soon kill you as let her have you. I mean it. But there, I'm writing high-flown nonsense. You love me, and I love you. Yes, love you, love you, love you. Your own adoring Bella." There was no address or date. Poirot handed it back with a grave face. "And the assumption is, Monsieur le Juge?" The examining magistrate shrugged his shoulders. "Obviously, Monsieur Renauld was involved with this Englishwoman, Bella. He comes over here, meets Madame Daubreuil, and starts an affair with her. He cools off toward the other woman, and she instantly suspects something. This letter contains a distinct threat. Monsieur Poirot, at first sight the case seemed simplicity itself, jealousy. The fact that Monsieur Renauld was stabbed in the back seemed to point distinctly to its being a woman's crime." Poirot nodded. "The stab in the back, yes, but not the grave. That was laborious work, hard work. No woman dug that grave, monsieur. That was a man's doing." The commissary exclaimed excitedly, "Yes, yes, you are right. We did not think of that. As I said," continued Monsieur Hotet, "at first sight the case seemed simple, but the masked men and the letter you received from Monsieur Renauld complicate matters. Here we seem to have an entirely different set of circumstances, with no relationship between the two. Regarding the letter written to yourself, do you think it is possible that it referred in any way to Bella and her threats?" Poirot shook his head. "Hardly. A man like Monsieur Renauld, who has led an adventurous life in out-of-the-way places, would not be likely to ask for protection against a woman. The examining magistrate nodded his head emphatically. My view exactly. Then we must look for the explanation of the letter. In Santiago, finished the commissary. I shall cable without delay to the police in that city, requesting full details of the murdered man's life out there. His love affairs, his business transactions, his friendships, and any enmities he may have incurred. It will be strange if, after that, we do not find a clue to his mysterious murder. The commissary looked around for approval. Excellent, said Poirot appreciatively. His wife, too, may be able to give us a pointer, added the magistrate. You have found no other letters from this Bella amongst Monsieur Renaud's effects? Asked Poirot. No. Of course, one of our first actions was to search through his private papers in the study. We found nothing of interest, however. All seemed square and above board. The only thing at all out of the ordinary was his will. Here it is. Poirot ran through the document. So, a legacy of £1,000 to Mr. Stonor. Who is he, by the way? Monsieur Renaud's secretary. He remained in England, but was over here once or twice for a weekend. And everything else was left unconditionally to his beloved wife, Eloise. Simply drawn up, but perfectly legal. Witnessed by the two servants, Denise and Françoise. Nothing very unusual about that. He handed it back. Perhaps, began Bex. You did not notice. The date, twinkled Poirot. But yes, I noticed it. A fortnight ago. Possibly it marks his first intimation of danger. Many rich men die intestate through never considering the likelihood of their demise. But it is dangerous to draw conclusions prematurely. It points, however, to his having a real liking and fondness for his wife, in spite of his amorous intrigues. Yes, said Monsieur Hautet doubtfully. But it is possibly a little unfair on his son, since it leaves him entirely dependent on his mother. If she were to marry again, and her second husband obtained an ascendancy over her, this boy might never touch a penny of his father's money. Poirot shrugged his shoulders. Man is a vain animal. Monsieur Renauld no doubt figured to himself that his widow would never marry again. As to the son, it may have been a wise precaution to leave the money in his mother's hands. The sons of rich men are proverbially wild. It may be as you say. Now, Monsieur Poirot, you would no doubt like to visit the scene of the crime. I am sorry that the body has been removed, but of course photographs have been taken from every conceivable angle, and will be at your disposal as soon as they are available. I thank you, monsieur, for all your courtesy. The commissary rose. Come with me, messieurs. He opened the door and bowed ceremoniously to Poirot to precede him. Poirot, with equal politeness, drew back and bowed to the commissary. Monsieur. Monsieur. At last, they got out into the hall. That room there, it is the study, isn't it? Asked Poirot suddenly, nodding towards the door opposite. Yes. You would like to see it. He threw the door open as he spoke, and we entered. The room which Monsieur Renauld had chosen for his own particular use was small, but furnished with great taste and comfort. A businesslike writing desk, with many pigeonholes, stood in the window. Two large leather-covered armchairs faced the fireplace, and between them was a round table covered with the latest books and magazines. Bookshelves lined two of the walls, and at the end of the room, opposite the window, there was a handsome oak sideboard with a tantalus on top. The curtains and portière were of a soft dull green, and the carpet matched them in tone. Poirot stood a moment taking in the room, then he stepped forward, passed his hand lightly over the backs of the leather chairs, picked up a magazine from the table, and drew a finger gingerly over the surface of the oak sideboard. His face expressed complete approval. No dust? I asked, with a smile. He beamed on me, appreciative of my knowledge of his peculiarities. Not a particle, my friend. And for once, perhaps, it is a pity. His sharp, Bird-like eyes darted here and there. "Ah," he remarked suddenly, with an intonation of relief. "The hearthrug is crooked," and he bent down to straighten it. Suddenly he uttered an exclamation and rose. In his hand he held a small fragment of paper. "In France, as in England," he remarked, "the domestics omit to sweep under the mats." Bex took the fragment from him, and I came closer to examine it. "You recognize it, Hastings?" I shook my head, puzzled, and yet that particular shade of pink paper was very familiar. The commissary's mental processes were quicker than mine. "A fragment of a check," he exclaimed. The piece of paper was roughly about 2 inches square. On it was written in ink the word, "Duveen." "Good," said Bex. "This check was payable to, or drawn by, one named Duveen." "The former, I fancy," said Poirot. "For, if I am not mistaken, the handwriting is that of Monsieur Renauld." That was soon established, by comparing it with a memorandum from the desk. "Dear me," murmured the commissary, with a crestfallen air. "I really cannot imagine how I came to overlook this." Poirot laughed. "The moral of that is, always look under the mats. My friend Hastings here will tell you that anything in the least crooked is a torment to me. As soon as I saw that the hearthrug was out of alignment, I said to myself, 'Good heavens!' The leg of the chair caught it in being pushed back. Possibly there may be something beneath it which the good Françoise overlooked. Françoise, or Denise, or Leonie, whoever cleaned this room. Since there is no dust, the room must have been done this morning. I reconstruct the incident like this. Yesterday, possibly last night, Monsieur Renauld drew a check to the order of someone named Duveen. Afterwards it was torn up and scattered on the floor. This morning, but Monsieur Bex was already pulling impatiently at the bell. Françoise answered it. Yes, there had been a lot of pieces of paper on the floor. What had she done with them? Put them on the kitchen stove, of course. What else? With a gesture of despair, Bex dismissed her. Then, his face lightening, he ran to the desk. In a minute he was hunting through the dead man's checkbook. Then he repeated his former gesture. The last counterfoil was blank. "Courage!" cried Poirot, clapping him on the back. "Without doubt, Madame Renauld will be able to tell us all about this mysterious person named Duveen." The commissary's face cleared. "That is true. Let us proceed." As we turned to leave the room, Poirot remarked casually, "It was here that Monsieur Renauld received his guest last night, eh?" "It was. But how did you know?" "By this. I found it on the back of the leather chair." And he held up between his finger and thumb a long black hair, a woman's hair. Monsieur Bex took us out by the back of the house to where there was a small shed leaning against the house. He produced a key from his pocket and unlocked it. "The body is here. We moved it from the scene of the crime just before you arrived, as the photographers had finished with it." He opened the door, and we passed in. The murdered man lay on the ground, with a sheet over him. Monsieur Bex skillfully whipped off the covering. Renauld was a man of medium height, slender and lithe in figure. He looked about 50 years of age, and his dark hair was plentifully streaked with gray. He was clean-shaven, with a long thin nose, and eyes set rather close together, and his skin was deeply bronzed, as that of a man who had spent most of his life beneath tropical skies. His lips were drawn back from his teeth, and an expression of absolute amazement and terror was stamped on the livid features. "One can see by his face that he was stabbed in the back," remarked Poirot. Very gently, he turned the dead man over. There, between the shoulder blades, staining the light fawn overcoat, was a round dark patch. In the middle of it there was a slit in the cloth. Poirot examined it closely. "Have you any idea what weapon the crime was committed?" "It was left in the wound." The commissary reached down a large glass jar. In it was a small object that looked to me more like a paper knife than anything else. It had a black handle and a narrow shining blade. The whole thing was not more than 10 inches long. Poirot tested the discolored point gingerly with his fingertip. My word! But it is sharp. A nice, easy little tool for murder. Unfortunately, we could find no trace of fingerprints on it, remarked Bex regretfully. The murderer must have worn gloves. Of course he did, said Poirot contemptuously. Even in Santiago they know enough for that. The merest amateur of an English mise knows it, thanks to the publicity the Bertillon system has been given in the press. All the same, it interests me very much that there were no fingerprints. It is so amazingly simple to leave the fingerprints of someone else. And then the police are happy. He shook his head. I very much fear our criminal is not a man of method. Either that or he was pressed for time. But we shall see. He let the body fall back into its original position. He wore only underclothes under his overcoat, I see, he remarked. Yes, the examining magistrate thinks that is rather a curious point. At this minute there was a tap on the door which Bex had closed after him. He strode forward and opened it. Françoise was there. She endeavored to peep in with ghoulish curiosity. "Well, what is it?" demanded Bex impatiently. "Madam. She sends a message that she is much recovered and is quite ready to receive the examining magistrate." "Good," said Monsieur Bex briskly. "Tell Monsieur Hautet, and say that we will come at once." Poirot lingered a moment, looking back towards the body. I thought for a moment that he was going to apostrophize it, to declare aloud his determination never to rest till he had discovered the murderer. But when he spoke, it was tamely and awkwardly, and his comment was ludicrously inappropriate to the solemnity of the moment. "He wore his overcoat very long," he said constrainedly. Chapter 5 Mrs. Renaud's Story. We found Monsieur Hautet awaiting us in the hall, and we all proceeded upstairs together, Françoise marching ahead to show us the way. Poirot went up in a zigzag fashion, which puzzled me until he whispered with a grimace. No wonder the servants heard Monsieur Renauld mounting the stairs, not a board of them but creaks fit to wake the dead. At the head of the staircase, a small passage branched off. "The servants' quarters," explained Bex. We continued along a corridor, and Françoise tapped on the last door to the right of it. A faint voice bade us enter, and we passed into a large, sunny apartment looking out towards the sea, which showed blue and sparkling about a quarter of a mile distant. On a couch, propped up with cushions and attended by Dr. Durand, lay a tall, striking-looking woman. She was middle-aged, and her once dark hair was now almost entirely silvered, but the intense vitality and strength of her personality would have made itself felt anywhere. You knew at once that you were in the presence of what the French call une maîtresse femme, a dominant woman. She greeted us with a dignified inclination of the head. "Please be seated, messieurs." We took chairs, and the magistrate's clerk established himself at a round table. "I hope, madam," began Monsieur Hautet, "that it will not distress you unduly to relate to us what occurred last night?" "Not at all, monsieur. I know the value of time if these scoundrel assassins are to be caught and punished." "Very well, madam. It will fatigue you less, I think, if I ask you questions and you confine yourself to answering them. At what time did you go to bed last night?" "At 9:30, monsieur. I was tired." "And your husband?" "About an hour later, I fancy." "Did he seem disturbed, upset in any way?" "No, not more than usual." "What happened then?" "We slept. I was awakened by a hand being pressed over my mouth. I tried to scream, but the hand prevented me. There were 2 men in the room. They were both masked." "Can you describe them at all, madam?" "One was very tall and had a long black beard. The other was short and stout. His beard was reddish. They both wore hats pulled down over their eyes." "Said the magistrate thoughtfully. Too much beard, I fear. You mean they were false? Yes, madam. But continue your story. It was the short man who was holding me. He forced a gag into my mouth and then bound me with rope, hand and foot. The other man was standing over my husband. He had caught up my little dagger paper knife from the dressing table and was holding it with the point just over his heart. When the short man had finished with me, he joined the other, and they forced my husband to get up and accompany them into the dressing room next door. I was nearly fainting with terror. Nevertheless, I listened desperately. They were speaking in too low a tone for me to hear what they said. But I recognized the language, a bastard Spanish such as is spoken in some parts of South America. They seemed to be demanding something from my husband, and presently they grew angry, and their voices rose a little. I think the tall man was speaking. "You know what we want," he said. "The secret. Where is it?" I do not know what my husband answered, but the other replied fiercely, "You lie. We know you have it. Where are your keys?" Then I heard the sounds of drawers being pulled out. There is a safe on the wall of my husband's dressing room in which he always keeps a fairly large amount of ready money. Leonie tells me this has been rifled and the money taken, but evidently what they were looking for was not there, for presently I heard the tall man, with an oath, command my husband to dress himself. Soon after that, I think some noise in the house must have disturbed them, for they hustled my husband out into my room, only half-dressed. "Pardon," interrupted Poirot, "but is there then no other exit from the dressing room?" "No, monsieur, there is only the communicating door into my room." They hurried my husband through, the short man in front, and the tall man behind him with the dagger still in his hand. Paul tried to break away to come to me. I saw his agonized eyes. He turned to his captors. "I must speak to her," he said. Then, coming to the side of the bed, "It is all right, Eloise," he said. "Do not be afraid. I shall return before morning." But, although he tried to make his voice confident, I could see the terror in his eyes. Then they hustled him out of the door, the tall man saying, "One sound, and you are a dead man, remember." "After that," continued Mrs. Renauld, "I must have fainted. The next thing I recollect is Leonie rubbing my wrists and giving me brandy." "Madame Renauld," said the magistrate, "had you any idea what it was for which the assassins were searching?" "None whatever, monsieur." "Had you any knowledge that your husband feared something?" "Yes. I had seen the change in him." "How long ago was that?" Mrs. Renauld reflected. 10 days perhaps. "Not longer." "Possibly. I only noticed it then." "Did you question your husband at all as to the cause?" "Once. He put me off evasively. Nevertheless, I was convinced that he was suffering some terrible anxiety. However, since he evidently wished to conceal the fact from me, I tried to pretend that I had noticed nothing." "Were you aware that he had called in the services of a detective?" "A detective?" exclaimed Mrs. Renauld, very much surprised. "Yes, this gentleman, Monsieur Hercule Poirot." Poirot bowed. "He arrived today in response to a summons from your husband." And taking the letter written by Monsieur Renauld from his pocket, he handed it to the lady. She read it with apparently genuine astonishment. "I had no idea of this." Evidently, he was fully cognizant of the danger. "Now, madam, I will beg you to be frank with me. Is there any incident in your husband's past life in South America which might shed light on his murder?" Mrs. Renauld reflected deeply, but at last shook her head. "I can think of none. Certainly my husband had many enemies, people he had gotten the better of in some way or another, but I can think of no one distinctive case. I do not say there is no such incident, only that I am not aware of it." The examining magistrate stroked his beard disconsolately. "And you can fix the time of this outrage?" "Yes, I distinctly remember hearing the clock on the mantelpiece strike 2. She nodded towards an 8-day traveling clock in a leather case which stood in the center of the chimney-piece. Poirot rose from his seat, scrutinized the clock carefully, and nodded, satisfied. "And here too," exclaimed Monsieur Bex, "is a wrist-watch, knocked off the dressing-table by the assassins, no doubt, and smashed to atoms. Little did they know it would testify against them." Gently he picked away the fragments of broken glass. Suddenly his face changed to one of utter stupefaction. "My God!" he ejaculated. "What is it? The hands of the watch point to 7 o'clock. What?" cried the examining magistrate, astonished. But Poirot, deft as ever, took the broken trinket from the startled commissary and held it to his ear. Then he smiled. "The glass is broken, yes, but the watch itself is still going." The explanation of the mystery was greeted with a relieved smile. But the magistrate thought of another point. "But surely it is not 7 o'clock now?" "No," said Poirot gently. "It is a few minutes after 5. Possibly the watch gains time. Is that so, madam?" Mrs. Renauld was frowning perplexedly. "It does gain," she admitted, "but I've never known it to gain quite so much as that." With a gesture of impatience, the magistrate left the matter of the watch and proceeded with his interrogation. "Madam, the front door was found ajar. It seems almost certain that the murderers entered that way, yet it has not been forced at all. Can you suggest any explanation?" "Possibly my husband went out for a stroll and forgot to latch it when he came in." "Is that a likely thing to happen?" "Very. My husband was the most absent-minded of men." There was a slight frown on her brow as she spoke, as though this trait in the dead man's character had at times vexed her. "There is one inference I think we might draw," remarked the commissary suddenly. "Since the men insisted on Monsieur Renauld dressing himself, it looks as though the place they were taking him to, the place where the secret was concealed, lay some distance away." The magistrate nodded. "Yes, far, and yet not too far, since he spoke of being back by morning." "What time does the last train leave the station of Merlinville?" asked Poirot. 11:50 one way, and 12:17 the other, but it is more probable that they had a motor waiting." "Of course," agreed Poirot, looking somewhat crestfallen. "Indeed, that might be one way of tracing them," continued the magistrate, brightening. "A motor containing 2 foreigners is quite likely to have been noticed." "That is an excellent point, Monsieur Bex." He smiled to himself, and then, becoming grave once more, he said to Mrs. Renauld, "There is another question. Do you know anyone with the name of Duveen?" "Duveen?" Mrs. Renauld repeated thoughtfully. "No, for the moment, I cannot say I do." "You have never heard your husband mention anyone of that name?" "Never." "Do you know anyone whose given name is Bella?" He watched Mrs. Renauld narrowly as he spoke, seeking to surprise any signs of anger or consciousness, but she merely shook her head in quite a natural manner. He continued his questions. "Are you aware that your husband had a visitor last night?" Now he saw the red mount slightly in her cheeks, but she replied composedly, "No." "Who was that?" "A lady." "Indeed." But for the moment the magistrate was content to say no more. It seemed unlikely that Madame Daubreuil had any connection with the crime, and he was anxious not to upset Mrs. Renauld more than necessary. He made a sign to the commissary, and the latter replied with a nod. Then rising, he went across the room and returned with the glass jar we had seen in the outhouse in his hand. From this, he took the dagger. "Madam," he said gently, "do you recognize this?" She gave a little cry. "Yes, that is my little dagger." Then, she saw the stained point, and she drew back, her eyes widening with horror. "Is that blood?" "Yes, madam. Your husband was killed with this weapon." He removed it hastily from sight. You are quite sure about it being the one that was on your dressing table last night? Oh, yes. It was a present from my son. He was in the Air Force during the war. He gave his age as older than it was. There was a touch of the proud mother in her voice. This was made from a streamlined airplane wire and was given to me by my son as a souvenir of the war. I see, madam. That brings us to another matter. Your son, where is he now? It is necessary that he should be telegraphed without delay. Jack. He is on his way to Buenos Aires. What? Yes. My husband telegraphed to him yesterday. He had sent him on business to Paris, but yesterday he discovered that it would be necessary for him to proceed without delay to South America. There was a boat leaving Cherbourg for Buenos Aires last night, and he wired him to catch it. Have you any knowledge of what the business in Buenos Aires was? No, monsieur, I know nothing of its nature, but Buenos Aires is not my son's final destination. He was going overland from there to Santiago, and, in unison, the magistrate and the commissary exclaimed, Santiago! Again Santiago! It was at this moment, when we were all stunned by the mention of that word, that Poirot approached Mrs. Renauld. He had been standing by the window like a man lost in a dream, and I doubt if he had fully taken in what had passed. He paused by the lady's side with a bow. Pardon, madam, but may I examine your wrists? Though slightly surprised at the request, Mrs. Renauld held them out to him. Around each of them was a cruel red mark where the cords had bitten into the flesh. As he examined them, I fancied that a momentary flicker of excitement I had seen in his eyes disappeared. They must cause you great pain, he said, and once more he looked puzzled. But the magistrate was speaking excitedly. Young Monsieur Renauld must be communicated with at once by wireless. It is vital that we should know anything he can tell us about this trip to Santiago. He hesitated. I hoped he might have been near at hand, so that we could have saved you pain, madam. He paused. You mean, she said in a low voice, the identification of my husband's body? The magistrate bowed his head. I am a strong woman, monsieur. I can bear all that is required of me. I am ready, now. Oh, tomorrow will be quite soon enough, I assure you. I prefer to get it over, she said in a low tone, a spasm of pain crossing her face. If you will be so good as to give me your arm, doctor? The doctor hastened forward, a cloak was thrown over Mrs. Renaud's shoulders, and a slow procession went down the stairs. Monsieur Bex hurried on ahead to open the door of the shed. In a minute or two, Mrs. Renauld appeared in the doorway. She was very pale, but resolute. Behind her, Monsieur Hautet was clacking commiserations and apologies like an animated hen. She raised her hand to her face. A moment, messrs, while I steel myself. She took her hand away and looked down at the dead man. Then the marvelous self-control which had upheld her so far deserted her. Paul, she cried. Husband! Oh God! And pitching forward, she fell unconscious to the ground. Instantly Poirot was beside her. He raised the lid of her eye, felt her pulse. When he had satisfied himself that she had really fainted, he drew aside. He caught me by the arm. I am an imbecile, my friend. If ever there was love and grief in a woman's voice, I heard it then. My little idea was all wrong. Well then, I must start again. Chapter 6. The scene of the crime. Between them, the doctor and Monsieur Hautet carried the unconscious woman into the house. The commissary looked after them, shaking his head. Poor woman, he murmured to himself. The shock was too much for her. Well, we can do nothing. Now, Monsieur Poirot, shall we visit the place where the crime was committed? If you please, Monsieur Bex. We passed through the house and out by the front door. Poirot had looked up at the staircase in passing, and shook his head in a dissatisfied manner. It is incredible to me that the servants heard nothing. The creaking of that staircase, with 3 people descending it, would awaken the dead. It was the middle of the night, remember. They were sound asleep by then. But Poirot continued to shake his head, as though not fully accepting the explanation. On the sweep of the drive, he paused, looking up at the house. What moved them in the first place to try if the front door was open? It was most unlikely that it should be. It was far more probable that they should at once try to force a window. But all the windows on the ground floor are barred with iron shutters, objected the commissary. Poirot pointed to a window on the first floor. That is the window of the bedroom we have just come from, is it not? And see, there is a tree by which it would be the easiest thing in the world to mount. Possibly, admitted the other. But they could not have done so without leaving footprints in the flower-bed. I saw the justice of his words. There were 2 large oval flower-beds planted with scarlet geraniums, one on each side of the steps leading up to the front door. The tree in question had its roots actually at the back of the bed itself, and it would have been impossible to reach it without stepping on the bed. You see, continued the commissary, owing to the dry weather no prints would show on the drive or paths, but on the soft mold of the flower-bed, it would have been a very different affair. Poirot went close to the bed and studied it attentively. As Bex had said, the mold was perfectly smooth. There was not an indentation on it anywhere. Poirot nodded, as though convinced, and we turned away, but he suddenly darted off and began examining the other flower-bed. Monsieur Bex, he called. See here. Here are plenty of traces for you. The commissary joined him, and smiled. My dear Monsieur Poirot, those are no doubt the footprints of the gardener's large hobnailed boots. In any case, it would have no importance, since on this side we have no tree, and consequently no means of gaining access to the upper story. True, said Poirot, evidently crestfallen. So you think these footprints are of no importance? Not the least in the world. Then, to my utter astonishment, Poirot pronounced these words. I do not agree with you. I have a little idea that these footprints are the most important things we have seen yet. Monsieur Bex said nothing, merely shrugged his shoulders. He was far too courteous to utter his real opinion. Shall we proceed? He asked instead. Certainly. I can investigate this matter of the footprints later, said Poirot cheerfully. Instead of following the drive down to the gate, Monsieur Bex turned up a path that branched off at right angles. It led, up a slight incline, around to the right of the house, and was bordered on either side by a kind of shrubbery. Suddenly, it emerged into a little clearing from which one obtained a view of the sea. A seat had been placed here, and not far from it was a rather ramshackle shed. A few steps further on, a neat line of small bushes marked the boundary of the villa grounds. Monsieur Bex pushed his way through these, and we found ourselves on a wide stretch of open downs. I looked round and saw something that filled me with astonishment. Why, this is a golf course, I cried. Bex nodded. The limits are not completed yet, he explained. It is hoped to be able to open them sometime next month. It was some of the men working on them who discovered the body early this morning. I gasped. A little to my left, where for the moment I had overlooked it, was a long, narrow pit, and by it, face downwards, was the body of a man. For a moment, my heart gave a terrible leap, and I had a wild fantasy that the tragedy had been duplicated. But the commissary dispelled my illusion by moving forward with a sharp exclamation of annoyance. What have my police been about? They had strict orders to allow no one near the place without proper credentials. The man on the ground turned his head over his shoulder. But I have proper credentials, he remarked, and rose slowly to his feet. My dear Monsieur Giraud, cried the commissary, I had no idea that you had arrived, even. The examining magistrate has been awaiting you with the utmost impatience. As he spoke, I was scanning the newcomer with the keenest curiosity. The famous detective from the Paris Charite was familiar to me by name, and I was extremely interested to see him in the flesh. He was very tall, perhaps about 30 years of age, with auburn hair and mustache, and a military bearing. There was a trace of arrogance in his manner, which showed that he was fully alive to his own importance. Bex introduced us, presenting Poirot as a colleague. A flicker of interest came into the detective's eye. "I know you by name, Monsieur Poirot," he said. "You cut quite a figure in the old days, didn't you? But methods are very different now." "Crimes, though, are very much the same," remarked Poirot gently. I saw at once that Giraud was prepared to be hostile. He resented the other being associated with him, and I felt that if he came across any clue of importance, he would be more than likely to keep it to himself. "The examining magistrate," began Bex again, but Giraud interrupted him rudely. "A fig for the examining magistrate. The light is the important thing. For all practical purposes it will be gone in another half-hour or so. I know all about the case, and the people at the house will do very well until tomorrow. But if we're going to find a clue to the murderers, here is the spot we shall find it. Is it your police who have been trampling all over the place? I thought they knew better nowadays." "Assuredly they do. The marks you complain of were made by the workmen who discovered the body." The other grunted disgustedly. "I can see the tracks where the three of them came through the hedge, but they were cunning. You can just recognize the center footmarks as those of Monsieur Renauld, but those on either side have been carefully obliterated. Not that there would really be much to see anyway on this hard ground, but they weren't taking any chances." "The external sign," said Poirot. "That is what you seek, eh?" The other detective stared. "Of course." A very faint smile came to Poirot's lips. He seemed about to speak, but checked himself. He bent down to where a spade was lying. But Poirot was now apparently interested in something else. A short, discolored piece of lead piping which lay beside the spade. He touched it delicately with his finger. "And does this, too, belong to the murdered man?" he asked, and I thought I detected a subtle flavor of irony in the question. Giraud shrugged his shoulders to indicate that he neither knew nor cared. "May have been lying around here for weeks. Anyway, it doesn't interest me." "I, on the contrary, find it very interesting," said Poirot sweetly. I guessed that he was merely bent on annoying the Paris detective, and, if so, he succeeded. The other turned away rudely, remarking that he had no time to waste, and bending down, he resumed his minute search of the ground. Meanwhile Poirot, as though struck by a sudden idea, stepped back over the boundary and tried the door of the little shed. "That's locked," said Giraud over his shoulder. "But it's only a place where the gardener keeps his rubbish. The spade didn't come from there, but from the tool shed up by the house." "Marvelous," murmured Monsieur Bex to me ecstatically. "He has been here but half an hour, and he already knows everything. What a man! Undoubtedly Giraud is the greatest detective alive today." Although I disliked the detective heartily, I nevertheless was secretly impressed. Efficiency seemed to radiate from the man. I could not help feeling that, so far, Poirot had not greatly distinguished himself, and it vexed me. He seemed to be directing his attention to all sorts of silly, puerile points that had nothing to do with the case. Indeed, at this juncture, he suddenly asked, "Monsieur Bex, tell me, I pray you, the meaning of this whitewashed line that extends all around the grave. Is it a device of the police?" "No, Monsieur Poirot, it is an affair of the golf course. It shows that there is here to be a bunker, as you call it." "A bunker?" Poirot turned to me. "That is the irregular hole filled with sand and a bank at one side, is it not?" I concurred. "You do not play golf, Monsieur Poirot?" inquired Bex. "I never. What a game!" He became excited. "Figure to yourself, each hole is of a different length. The obstacles, they are not arranged mathematically. Even the greens are frequently up one side. There is only one pleasing thing, how do you call them? Tee boxes. They, at least, are symmetrical. I could not refrain from a laugh at the way the game appeared to Poirot, and my little friend smiled at me affectionately, bearing no malice. Then he asked, "But Monsieur Renauld, no doubt he played golf?" "Yes, he was a keen golfer. It's mainly owing to him, and to his large subscriptions, that this work is being carried forward. He even had a say in the designing of it." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Then he remarked, "It was not a very good choice they made, of a spot to bury the body? When the men began to dig up the ground, all would have been discovered." "Exactly," cried Giraud triumphantly. "And that proves that they were strangers to the place. It's an excellent piece of indirect evidence." "Yes," said Poirot doubtfully. "No one who knew would bury a body there, unless they wanted it to be discovered. And that is clearly absurd, is it not?" Giraud did not even trouble to reply. "Yes," said Poirot, in a somewhat dissatisfied voice. "Yes, undoubtedly, absurd." Chapter 7: The Mysterious Madame Daubreuil. As we walked back to the house, Monsieur Bex excused himself, saying he needed to inform the examining magistrate about Giraud's arrival. Giraud, for his part, was clearly pleased when Poirot said he had seen enough. The last thing we observed as we left the spot was Giraud, thoroughly searching on his hands and knees, a dedication I couldn't help but admire. Poirot must have guessed my thoughts, because as soon as we were alone, he remarked ironically, "At last you have seen the detective you admire, the human foxhound. Isn't that right, my friend?" "At any rate, he's doing something," I said sharply. "If there's anything to find, he'll find it. Now you—" "Well, I've also found something. A piece of lead piping." "Nonsense, Poirot. You know very well that has nothing to do with it. I meant little things, traces that might infallibly lead us to the murderers. My friend, a clue 2 feet long is every bit as valuable as one measuring 2 millimeters. But it's the romantic idea that all important clues must be infinitesimal. As for the piece of lead piping having nothing to do with the crime, you say that because Giraud told you so. No," he added, as I was about to ask a question. "We will say no more. Leave Giraud to his search and me to my ideas. The case seems straightforward enough, and yet, my friend, I am not satisfied. And do you know why? Because of the wristwatch is 2 hours fast. And then there are several curious little points that don't seem to fit in. For instance, if the murderer's object was revenge, why didn't they stab Renauld in his sleep and be done with it?" "They wanted the secret," I reminded him. Poirot brushed a speck of dust from his sleeve with a dissatisfied air. "Well, where is this secret?" "Presumably some distance away, since they wished him to dress himself. Yet he is found murdered close at hand, almost within earshot of the house. Then again, it's pure chance that a weapon such as the dagger should be lying casually, ready to hand." He paused, frowning, and then continued, "Why did the servants hear nothing? Were they drugged? Was there an accomplice, and did that accomplice ensure the front door remained open? I wonder if—" He stopped abruptly. We had reached the drive in front of the house. Suddenly, he turned to me. "My friend, I am about to surprise you, to please you. I have taken your reproaches to heart. We will examine some footprints." "Where?" "In that right-hand flower-bed yonder. Monsieur Bex says they are the gardener's footprints. Let us see if that is so. See, he approaches with his wheelbarrow. Indeed, an elderly man was just crossing the drive with a barrow full of seedlings. Poirot called to him, and he set down the barrow and hobbled toward us. You're going to ask him for one of his boots to compare with the footprints?" I asked breathlessly. My faith in Poirot revived a little. Since he said the footprints in this right-hand bed were important, presumably they were. Exactly, said Poirot. But won't he think it's very odd? He will not think about it at all. We could say no more, for the old man had joined us. You want me for something, monsieur? Yes. You have been a gardener here for a long time, haven't you? 24 years, monsieur. And your name is? Auguste, monsieur. I was admiring these magnificent geraniums. They are truly superb. Have they been planted long? Some time, monsieur. But of course, to keep the beds looking smart, one must keep planting a few new plants, and remove those that are past their prime, besides keeping the old blooms well picked off. You put in some new plants yesterday, didn't you? Those in the middle there, and in the other bed also. Monsieur has a sharp eye. It always takes a day or so for them to pick up. Yes, I put 10 new plants in each bed last night. As monsieur doubtless knows, one should not plant when the sun is hot. Auguste was charmed by Poirot's interest and quite inclined to be garrulous. That is a splendid specimen there, said Poirot, pointing. Might I perhaps have a cutting of it? But certainly, monsieur. The old fellow stepped into the bed and carefully took a slip from the plant Poirot had admired. Poirot was profuse in his thanks, and Auguste departed to his barrow. You see, said Poirot with a smile, as he bent over the bed to examine the indentation of the gardener's hobnailed boot. It is quite simple. I did not realize that the foot would be inside the boot. You do not use your excellent mental capacities sufficiently. Well, what of the footmark? I examined the bed carefully. All the footmarks in the bed were made by the same boot, I said at length after a careful study. You think so? Well, I agree with you, said Poirot. He seemed quite uninterested, as though he were thinking of something else. At any rate, I remarked, you will have one less bee in your bonnet now. My goodness! But what an idiom! What does it mean? What I meant was that now you will give up your interest in these footmarks. But to my surprise, Poirot shook his head. No, no, my friend. At last I am on the right track. I am still in the dark, but, as I hinted just now to Monsieur Bex, these footmarks are the most important and interesting things in the case. That poor Giraud, I shouldn't be surprised if he took no notice of them whatsoever. At that moment, the front door opened, and Monsieur Hotet and the commissary came down the steps. Ah, Monsieur Poirot, we were coming to look for you, said the magistrate. It is getting late, but I wish to visit Madame Daubreuil. Without doubt, she will be very much upset by Monsieur Renaud's death, and we may be fortunate enough to get a clue from her. The secret that he did not confide to his wife, it is possible that he may have told it to the woman whose love held him enslaved. We know where our Samsons are weak, don't we? I admired the picturesqueness of Monsieur Hotet's language. I suspected that the examining magistrate was by now thoroughly enjoying his part in the mysterious drama. Is Monsieur Giraud not going to accompany us? Asked Poirot. Monsieur Giraud has shown clearly that he prefers to conduct the case in his own way, said Monsieur Hotet dryly. One could see easily enough that Giraud's cavalier treatment of the examining magistrate had not prejudiced the latter in his favor. We said no more, but fell into line. Poirot walked with the examining magistrate, and the commissary and I followed a few paces behind. There is no doubt that Françoise's story is substantially correct, he remarked to me in a confidential tone. I have been telephoning headquarters. It seems that 3 times in the last 6 weeks, that is to say since the arrival of Monsieur Renauld at Merlinville, Madame Daubreuil has paid a large sum in notes into her banking account. Altogether the sum totals 200,000 francs. Dear me, I said, considering. That must be something like 4,000 pounds. Precisely. Yes, there can be no doubt that he was absolutely infatuated. but it remains to be seen whether he confided his secret to her. The examining magistrate is hopeful, but I hardly share his views. During this conversation, we were walking down the lane towards the fork in the road where our car had halted earlier in the afternoon, and in another moment I realized that the Villa Marguerite, the home of the mysterious Madame Daubreuil, was the small house from which the beautiful girl had emerged. "She has lived here for many years," said the commissary, nodding his head towards the house. "Very quietly, very unobtrusively. She seems to have no friends or relations other than the acquaintances she has made in Merlinville. She never refers to the past, nor to her husband. One does not even know if he is alive or dead. There is a mystery about her. You comprehend?" I nodded, my interest growing. "And the daughter?" I ventured. "A truly beautiful young girl, modest, devout, all that she should be. One pities her, for, though she may know nothing of the past, a man who wants to ask her hand in marriage must necessarily inform himself, and then—" The commissary shrugged his shoulders cynically. "But it would not be her fault," I cried, with rising indignation. "No. But what will you do? A man is particular about his wife's background." I was prevented from further argument by our arrival at the door. Monsieur Hautet rang the bell. A few minutes elapsed, and then we heard a footfall within, and the door was opened. On the threshold stood my young goddess of that afternoon. When she saw us, the color left her cheeks, leaving her deathly white, and her eyes widened with apprehension. There was no doubt about it. She was afraid. "Mademoiselle Daubreuil," said Monsieur Hautet, sweeping off his hat, "we regret infinitely to disturb you, but the exigencies of the law, you comprehend? My compliments to Madame, your mother, and will she have the goodness to grant me a few moments' interview?" For a moment the girl stood motionless. Her left hand was pressed to her side, as though to still the sudden, unconquerable agitation of her heart. But she mastered herself and said in a low voice, "I will go and see. Please come inside." She entered a room on the left of the hall, and we heard the low murmur of her voice. And then another voice, much the same in timbre, but with a slightly harder inflection behind its mellow roundness, said, "But certainly. Ask them to enter." In another minute we were face to face with the mysterious Madame Daubreuil. She was not nearly so tall as her daughter, and the rounded curves of her figure had all the grace of full maturity. Her hair, again unlike her daughter's, was dark, and parted in the middle in the Madonna style. Her eyes, half hidden by the drooping lids, were blue. There was a dimple in the round chin, and the half-parted lips seemed always to hover on the verge of a mysterious smile. There was something almost exaggeratedly feminine about her, at once yielding and seductive. Though very well preserved, she was certainly no longer young, but her charm was of the quality which is independent of age. Standing there, in her black dress with a fresh white collar and cuffs, her hands clasped together, she looked subtly appealing and helpless. "You wish to see me, monsieur?" she asked. "Yes, madame." Monsieur Hautet cleared his throat. "I am investigating the death of Monsieur Renauld. You have heard of it, no doubt." She bowed her head without speaking. Her expression did not change. "We came to ask you whether you can, throw any light upon the circumstances surrounding it?" The surprise in her tone was excellent. "Yes, madam. It would, perhaps, be better if we could speak to you alone." He looked meaningfully in the direction of the girl. Madame Daubreuil turned to her. "Martha, dear." But the girl shook her head. "No, maman, I will not go. I am not a child. I am 22. I shall not go." Madame Daubreuil turned back to the examining magistrate. "You see, monsieur, I should prefer not to speak before Mademoiselle Daubreuil. As my daughter says, she is not a child." For a moment the magistrate hesitated, baffled. "Very well, madam," he said at last. "Have it your own way. We have reason to believe that you were in the habit of visiting the dead man at his villa in the evenings. Is that so?" The color rose in the lady's pale cheeks, but she replied quietly, "I deny your right to ask me such a question. Madam, we are investigating a murder." "Well, what of it? I had nothing to do with the murder." "Madam, we do not say that for a moment. But you knew the dead man well. Did he ever confide in you as to any danger that threatened him?" "Never." "Did he ever mention his life in Santiago, and any enemies he may have made there?" "No." "Then you can give us no help at all?" "I fear not. I really do not see why you should come to me. Cannot his wife tell you what you want to know?" Her voice held a slender inflection of irony. "Madame Renauld has told us all she can." "Ah," said Madame Daubreuil. "I wonder." "You wonder what, madam?" "Nothing." The examining magistrate looked at her. He was aware that he was fighting a duel, and that he had no mean antagonist. "You persist in your statement that Monsieur Renauld confided nothing in you? Why should you think it likely that he should confide in me?" "Because, madam," said Monsieur Hotet, with calculated brutality, "a man tells to his mistress what he does not always tell to his wife." "Ah!" She sprang forward. Her eyes flashed fire. "Monsieur, you insult me. And before my daughter. I can tell you nothing. Have the goodness to leave my house." The honors undoubtedly rested with the lady. We left the Villa Marguerite like a shamefaced pack of schoolboys. The magistrate muttered angry ejaculations to himself. Poirot seemed lost in thought. Suddenly, he came out of his reverie with a start, and inquired of Monsieur Hotet if there was a good hotel nearby. "There is a small place, the Hôtel de Bains, on this side of town, a few hundred yards down the road. It will be handy for your investigations." "We shall see you in the morning then, I presume?" "Yes, I thank you, Monsieur Hotet." With mutual civilities, we parted company, Poirot and I going towards Merlinville, and the others returning to the Villa Geneviève. "The French police system is very marvelous," said Poirot, looking after them. "The information they possess about everyone's life, down to the most commonplace detail, is extraordinary. Though he has only been here a little over 6 weeks, they are perfectly well acquainted with Monsieur Renaud's tastes and pursuits, and at a moment's notice they can produce information as to Madame Daubreuil's banking account, and the sums that have lately been paid in. Undoubtedly, the dossier is a great institution. But what is that?" He turned sharply. A figure was running hatlessly down the road after us. It was Martha Daubreuil. "I beg your pardon," she cried breathlessly as she reached us. I shouldn't do this, I know. You must not tell my mother. But is it true what people say, that Monsieur Renauld called in a detective before he died, and that you are he?" "Yes, mademoiselle," said Poirot gently. "It is quite true. But how did you learn it?" "Françoise told our Amélie," explained Martha with a blush. Poirot made a grimace. "The secrecy, it is impossible in an affair of this kind. Not that it matters. Well, mademoiselle, what is it you want to know?" The girl hesitated. She seemed longing, yet fearing to speak. At last, almost in a whisper, she asked, "Is anyone suspected?" Poirot eyed her keenly. Then he replied evasively, "Suspicion is in the air at present, mademoiselle." "Yes, I know, but anyone in particular?" "Why do you want to know?" The girl seemed frightened by the question. All at once Poirot's words about her earlier in the day recurred to me. The girl with the anxious eyes. "Monsieur Renauld was always very kind to me," she replied at last. "It is natural that I should be interested." "I see," said Poirot. "Well, mademoiselle, suspicion at present is hovering around 2 persons. 2. I could have sworn there was a note of surprise and relief in her voice. Their names are unknown, but they are presumed to be Chileans from Santiago. And now, mademoiselle, you see what comes of being young and beautiful. I have betrayed professional secrets for you." The girl laughed merrily, and then, rather shyly, she thanked him. "I must run back now. Maman will miss me." And she turned and ran back up the road, looking like a modern Atlanta. I stared after her. "My friend," said Poirot, in his gentle, ironical voice, "are we to remain planted here all night, just because you have seen a beautiful young woman, and your head is in a whirl?" I laughed and apologized. "But she is beautiful, Poirot. Anyone might be excused for being bowled over by her." Poirot groaned. "My goodness! But it is that you have a susceptible heart." "Poirot," I said, "do you remember after the Styles case when you were in love with two charming women at once, and neither of them were for you?" "Yes, I remember. You consoled me by saying that perhaps someday we should hunt together again, and that then, well, we are hunting together again, and—" I paused, and laughed rather self-consciously. But to my surprise, Poirot shook his head very earnestly. "Ah, my friend, do not set your heart on Martha Daubreuil. She is not for you, that one. Take it from Papa Poirot." "Why?" I cried. "The commissary assured me that she was as good as she is beautiful. A perfect angel." "Some of the greatest criminals I have known had the faces of angels," remarked Poirot cheerfully. "A malformation of the gray cells may coincide quite easily with the face of a Madonna." "Poirot," I cried, horrified, "you cannot mean that you suspect an innocent child like this." "Tut, tut, tut. Do not excite yourself. I have not said that I suspected her. But you must admit that her anxiety to know about the case is somewhat unusual." "For once, I see further than you do," I said. "Her anxiety is not for herself, but for her mother." "My friend," said Poirot, "as usual, you see nothing at all. Madame Daubreuil is very well able to look after herself without her daughter worrying about her. I admit I was teasing you just now, but all the same I repeat what I said before. Do not set your heart on that girl. She is not for you. Hercule Poirot, know it. Good heavens! If only I could remember where I had seen that face." "What face?" I asked, surprised. "The daughter's." "No, the mother's." Noting my surprise, he nodded emphatically. "But yes, it is as I tell you. It was a long time ago, when I was still with the police in Belgium. I have never actually seen the woman before, but I have seen her picture, and in connection with some case. I rather fancy—" "Yes, I may be mistaken, but I rather fancy that it was a murder case." Chapter 8: An Unexpected Meeting. We arrived at the villa early the next morning. The guard at the gate did not bar our way this time. Instead, he respectfully saluted us, and we passed on to the house. The maid, Léonie, was just coming downstairs and seemed open to a little conversation. Poirot inquired about Mrs. Renaud's health. Léonie shook her head. "She is terribly upset, the poor lady. She will eat nothing, absolutely nothing. And she is as pale as a ghost. It is heartbreaking to see her. Ah, for example, I wouldn't grieve like that for a man who had deceived me with another woman." Poirot nodded sympathetically. "What you say is very true, but what can one do? A loving woman's heart will forgive many blows. Still, there must have been many arguments between them in the last few months, undoubtedly." Again Léonie shook her head. "Never, monsieur. Never have I heard Madame utter a word of protest or even reproach. She had the temper and disposition of an angel, quite different from monsieur." "Monsieur Renauld did not have the temper of an angel? Far from it. When he was enraged, the whole house knew of it. The day that he quarreled with Monsieur Jacques, good heavens! They might have been heard in the marketplace. They shouted so loud. Indeed, said Poirot. And when did this quarrel take place? Oh, it was just before Monsieur Jacques went to Paris. He almost missed his train. He came out of the library and grabbed his bag, which he had left in the hall. The automobile was being repaired, and he had to run for the station. I was dusting the salon, and I saw him pass, and his face was white, with 2 burning spots of red. Ah, but he was angry. Léonie was thoroughly enjoying her narrative. And the dispute, what was it about? Ah, that I do not know, confessed Léonie. It is true that they shouted, but their voices were so loud and high, and they spoke so fast, that only one well acquainted with English could have understood. But monsieur, he was like a thundercloud all day. Impossible to please him. The sound of a door shutting upstairs cut short Léonie's talkativeness. And Françoise, who awaits me? She exclaimed, remembering her duties belatedly. That old one, she always scolds. One moment, mademoiselle. The examining magistrate, where is he? They have gone out to look at the automobile in the garage. Monsieur the commissary had some idea that it might have been used on the night of the murder. What an idea, murmured Poirot, as the girl disappeared. You will go out and join them? No, I shall await their return in the salon. It is cool there on this hot morning. This calm way of taking things did not quite suit me. If you don't mind, I said, and hesitated. Not in the least. You wish to investigate on your own account, eh? Well, I'd rather like to have a look at Giraud, if he's anywhere about, and see what he's up to. The human foxhound, murmured Poirot, as he leaned back in a comfortable chair and closed his eyes. By all means, my friend. Goodbye. I strolled out of the front door. It was certainly hot. I turned up the path we had taken the day before. I had a mind to study the scene of the crime myself. I did not go directly to the spot, however, but turned aside into the bushes, so as to come out onto the links some 100 yards or so further to the right. If Giraud were still on the spot, I wanted to observe his methods before he knew of my presence. But the shrubbery here was much denser, and I had quite a struggle to force my way through. When I emerged at last onto the course, it was quite unexpected, and with such vigor that I cannonied heavily into a young lady who had been standing with her back to the bushes. She did not unnaturally give a suppressed shriek, but I, too, uttered an exclamation of surprise. For it was my friend from the train, Cinderella. The surprise was mutual. You! We both exclaimed simultaneously. The young lady recovered herself first. My only aunt! She exclaimed. What are you doing here? For that matter, what are you? I retorted. When last I saw you, the day before yesterday, you were trotting home to England like a good little boy. Have they given you a season ticket to and fro, on the strength of your being an MP? I ignored the end of her speech. When last I saw you, I said, you were trotting home with your sister like a good little girl. By the way, how is your sister? A flash of white teeth rewarded me. How kind of you to ask. My sister is well, I thank you. She is here with you. She remained in town, said the minx with dignity. I don't believe you've got a sister, I laughed. If you have, her name is Harris. Do you remember mine? She asked, with a smile. Cinderella. But you're going to tell me the real one now, aren't you? She shook her head with a wicked look. Not even why you're here? Oh, that. I suppose you've heard of members of my profession, resting at expensive French resorts? Dirt cheap if you know where to go. I eyed her keenly. Still, you had no intention of coming here when I met you 2 days ago? We all have our disappointments, said Miss Cinderella sententiously. There now, I've told you quite as much as is good for you. Little boys should not be inquisitive. You've not yet told me what you're doing here? Got the MP in tow, I suppose, enjoying yourself on the beach. I shook my head. Guess again. You remember my telling you that my great friend was a detective? Yes. And perhaps you've heard about this crime at the Villa Geneviève. She stared at me. Her chest heaved, and her eyes grew wide and round. You don't mean that you're involved in that? I nodded. There was no doubt that I had made a strong impression. Her emotion, as she regarded me, was only too evident. For some few seconds, she remained silent, staring at me. Then she nodded her head emphatically. Well, if that doesn't beat everything. Take me around. I want to see all the horrors. What do you mean? What I say. Bless the boy, didn't I tell you I loved crimes? What do you think I'm risking my ankles for in high-heeled shoes over this stubble? I've been nosing around for hours. Tried the front way in, but that old stick in the mud of a French gendarme wasn't having any of it. I guess Helen of Troy, and Cleopatra, and Mary, Queen of Scots, all rolled into one, wouldn't impress him. It's a real piece of luck happening upon you this way. Come on, show me all the sights. But look here, wait a minute, I can't. Nobody's allowed in. They're awfully strict. Aren't you and your friend the big shots? I was reluctant to give up my position of importance. Why are you so keen? I asked weakly. And what is it you want to see? Oh, everything. The place where it happened, and the weapon and the body and any fingerprints or interesting things like that. I've never had a chance to be right in on a murder like this before. It'll last me all my life. I turned away, sickened. What are women coming to nowadays? The girl's morbid excitement nauseated me. I had read of the mobs of women who besieged the law courts when some wretched man was being tried for his life on a capital charge. I had sometimes wondered who these women were. Now I know. They were like Cinderella, young, yet obsessed with a yearning for morbid excitement, for sensation at any price, without regard to any decency or good feeling. The vividness of the girl's beauty had attracted me in spite of myself, yet at heart I retained my first impression of disapproval and dislike. I thought of my mother, long since dead. What would she have said of this strange modern product of girlhood? The pretty face with the paint and powder, and the ghoulish mind behind. Come off your high horse, said the lady suddenly. And don't give yourself airs. When you got called to this job, did you put your nose in the air and say it was a nasty business, and you wouldn't be mixed up in it? No, but if you'd been here on a holiday, wouldn't you be nosing around just the same as I am? Of course you would. I'm a man. You're a woman. Your idea of a woman is someone who gets on a chair and shrieks if she sees a mouse. That's all prehistoric. But you will show me around, won't you? You see, it might make a big difference to me. In what way? They're keeping all the reporters out. I might get a big scoop with one of the papers. You don't know how much they pay for a bit of inside information. I hesitated. She slipped a small soft hand into mine. Please, there's a dear. I capitulated. Secretly, I knew that I should rather enjoy the part of showman. After all, the moral attitude displayed by the girl was none of my business. I was a little nervous as to what the examining magistrate might say, but I reassured myself by thinking that no harm could possibly be done. We went first to the spot where the body had been discovered. A man was on guard there, who saluted respectfully, knowing me by sight, and raised no question as to my companion. Presumably, he regarded her as vouched for by me. I explained to Cinderella just how the discovery had been made, and she listened attentively, sometimes asking an intelligent question. Then we turned our steps in the direction of the villa. I proceeded rather cautiously, for, truth to tell, I was not at all anxious to meet anyone. I took the girl through the shrubbery, around to the back of the house where the small shed was. I recollected that yesterday evening, after relocking the door, Monsieur Bex had left the key with the Sergeant de Ville Marchaud, in case Monsieur Giraud should require it while we are upstairs. I thought it quite likely that the Charite detective, after using it, had returned it to Marchaud again. Leaving the girl out of sight in the shrubbery, I entered the house. Marchaud was on duty outside the door of the salon. From within came the murmur of voices. Monsieur desires Hautet? He is within. He is again interrogating Françoise. No, I said hastily. I don't want him. But I should very much like the key of the shed outside if it is not against regulations. But certainly, monsieur. He produced it. Here it is. Monsieur the judge gave orders that all facilities were to be placed at your disposal. You will return it to me when you have finished out there, that is all. Of course. I felt a thrill of satisfaction as I realized that in Marchaud's eyes, at least, I ranked equally in importance with Poirot. The girl was waiting for me. She gave an exclamation of delight as she saw the key in my hand. You've got it then? Of course, I said coolly. All the same, you know, what I'm doing is highly irregular. You've been a perfect dear, and I shan't forget it. Come along. They can't see us from the house, can they? Wait a minute. I arrested her eager advance. I won't stop you if you really wish to go in. But do you? You've seen the grave and the grounds, and you've heard all the details of the affair. Isn't that enough for you? This is going to be gruesome, you know, and unpleasant. She looked at me for a moment with an expression that I could not quite fathom. Then she laughed. Me for the horrors, she said. Come along. In silence we arrived at the door of the shed. I opened it and we passed in. I walked over to the body, and gently pulled down the sheet as Monsieur Bex had done the preceding afternoon. A little gasping sound escaped from the girl's lips, and I turned and looked at her. There was horror on her face now, and those debonair high spirits of hers were utterly quenched. She had not chosen to listen to my advice, and she was punished now for her disregard of it. I felt singularly merciless towards her. She should go through with it now. I turned the corpse gently over. You see, I said, he was stabbed in the back. Her voice was almost soundless. With what? I nodded towards the glass jar. That dagger. Suddenly the girl reeled, and then sank down in a heap. I sprang to her assistance. You are faint. Come out of here. It has been too much for you. Water, she murmured. Quick, water. I left her, and rushed into the house. Fortunately none of the servants were about, and I was able to secure a glass of water unobserved and add a few drops of brandy from a pocket flask. In a few minutes I was back again. The girl was lying as I had left her, but a few sips of the brandy and water revived her in a marvelous manner. Take me out of here, oh, quickly, quickly, she cried, shuddering. Supporting her with my arm, I led her out into the air, and she pulled the door to behind her. Then she drew a deep breath. That's better. Oh, it was horrible. Why did you ever let me go in? I felt this to be so feminine that I could not help but smile. Secretly, I was not dissatisfied with her collapse. It proved that she was not quite so callous as I had thought her. After all, she was little more than a child, and her curiosity had probably been of the unthinking order. I did my best to stop you, you know, I said gently. I suppose you did. Well, goodbye. Look here, you can't start off like that, all alone. You're not fit for it. I insist on accompanying you back to Merlinville. Nonsense. I'm quite all right now. Supposing you felt faint again? No, I shall come with you. But this she resisted with a good deal of energy. In the end, however, I prevailed so far as to be allowed to accompany her to the outskirts of the town. We retraced our steps over our former route, passing the grave again, and making a detour onto the road. Where the first scattered line of shops began, she stopped and held out her hand. "Goodbye, and thank you ever so much for coming with me." "Are you sure you're all right now?" "Quite, thanks. I hope you won't get into any trouble over showing me things." I dismissed the idea lightly. "Well, goodbye." "Farewell," I corrected. "If you're staying here, we shall meet again." She flashed a smile at me. "That's so. Farewell, then." "Wait a second, you haven't told me your address?" "Oh, I'm staying at the Hotel du Fer. It's a little place, but quite good. Come and look me up tomorrow." "I will," I said, with perhaps rather unnecessary eagerness. I watched her out of sight, then turned and retraced my steps to the villa. I remembered that I had not relocked the door of the shed. Fortunately, no one had noticed the oversight, and turning the key I removed it and returned it to the Sergeant de Ville. And, as I did so, it came upon me suddenly that though Cinderella had given me her address, I still did not know her name. Chapter 9. Giraud finds some clues. In the drawing-room, I found the examining magistrate busy interrogating the old gardener, Auguste. Poirot and the commissary, who were both present, greeted me with a smile and a polite bow, respectively. I slipped quietly into a seat. Monsieur Hotet was painstaking and meticulous in the extreme, but he didn't manage to find anything of importance. Auguste admitted the gardening gloves were his. He wore them when handling a certain species of primula plant that was poisonous to some people. He couldn't say when he'd worn them last, and certainly hadn't missed them. When asked where they were kept, he replied, sometimes in one place, sometimes in another. The spade was usually in the small tool shed. Was it locked? Of course it was locked. Where was the key kept? Parbleu, it was in the door, of course. There was nothing of value to steal. Who would expect a party of bandits, of assassins? Such things didn't happen in Madame la Vicomtesse's time. Monsieur Hotet signaled that he was finished, and the old man withdrew, grumbling all the way. Remembering Poirot's unaccountable insistence on the footprints in the flower-beds, I scrutinized Auguste closely as he gave his evidence. Either he had nothing to do with the crime, or he was a consummate actor. Suddenly, just as he was going out of the door, an idea struck me. "Pardon me, Monsieur Hotet," I cried, "but will you permit me to ask him one question?" "But certainly, monsieur." Thus encouraged, I turned to Auguste. "Where do you keep your boots?" "Sac à papier," growled the old man. "On my feet. Where else?" "But when you go to bed at night?" "Under my bed." "But who cleans them?" "Nobody." "Why should they be cleaned?" "Do I promenade myself on the front like a young man?" "On Sunday, I wear my Sunday boots, bien entendu, but otherwise." He shrugged his shoulders. I shook my head, discouraged. "Well, well," said the magistrate. "We aren't making much progress. Undoubtedly, we are held up until we get the return cable from Santiago. Has anyone seen Giraud? In truth, that one lacks politeness. I have a very good mind to send for him, and—" "You won't have to send far, Monsieur le Juge." The quiet voice startled us. Giraud was standing outside, looking in through the open window. He leaped lightly into the room and advanced to the table. "Here I am, Monsieur le Juge, at your service. Accept my excuses for not presenting myself sooner." "Not at all. Not at all," said the magistrate, rather confused. "Of course, I am only a detective," continued Giraud. "I know nothing of interrogations. If I were conducting one, I should be inclined to do so without an open window. Anyone standing outside can so easily hear all that passes. But no matter. Monsieur Hotet flushed angrily. There was evidently going to be no love lost between the examining magistrate and the detective in charge of the case. They had fallen foul of each other from the start. Perhaps, in any event, it would have been much the same. To Giraud, all examining magistrates were fools, and to Monsieur Hotet, who took himself seriously, the casual manner of the Paris detective could not fail to give offense. "Eh bien, Monsieur Giraud," said the magistrate rather sharply. "Without doubt, you have been employing your time marvelously? You have the names of the assassins for us, have you not? And also the precise spot where they are now." Unmoved by this irony, Giraud replied, "I know at least where they have come from." Comment. Giraud took two small objects from his pocket and laid them on the table. We crowded around. The objects were very simple ones, the stub of a cigarette and an unlighted match. The detective wheeled around to Poirot. "What do you see there?" he asked. There was something almost brutal in his tone. It made my cheeks flush, but Poirot remained unmoved. He shrugged his shoulders. "A cigarette end and a match. And what does that tell you?" Poirot spread out his hands. "It tells me nothing." "Ah," said Giraud, in a satisfied voice. "You haven't made a study of these things. That's not an ordinary match, not in this country, at least. It's common enough in South America. Luckily, it's unlighted. I might not have recognized it otherwise." Evidently, one of the men threw away his cigarette end and lit another, spilling one match out of the box as he did so. "And the other match?" asked Poirot. "Which match?" "The one he lit his cigarette with. Have you found that also?" "No. Perhaps you didn't search very thoroughly." "Not search thoroughly." For a moment, it seemed as though the detective were going to break out angrily, but with an effort, he controlled himself. "I see you love a joke, Monsieur Poirot. But in any case, match or no match, the cigarette end would be sufficient. It is a South American cigarette with licorice pectoral paper." Poirot bowed. The commissary spoke. The cigarette end and match might have belonged to Monsieur Renauld. Remember, it is only 2 years since he returned from South America. "No," replied the other confidently. "I have already searched among the effects of Monsieur Renauld. The cigarettes he smoked and the matches he used are quite different." "You do not think it odd," asked Poirot, "that these strangers should come unprovided with a weapon, with gloves, with a spade, and that they should so conveniently find all these things?" Giraud smiled in a rather superior manner. "Undoubtedly, it is strange. Indeed, without the theory that I hold, it would be inexplicable." "Aha!" said Monsieur Hotet. "An accomplice. An accomplice within the house." "Or outside it," said Giraud with a peculiar smile. "But someone must have admitted them? We cannot allow that, by an unparalleled piece of good fortune, they found the door ajar for them to walk in." "D'accord, Monsieur le Juge. The door was open for them, but it could just as easily be opened from outside, by someone who possessed a key." "But who did possess a key?" Giraud shrugged his shoulders. "As for that, no one who possesses one is going to admit the fact if they can help it. But several people might have had one. Monsieur Jacques Renauld, the son, for instance. It is true that he is on his way to South America, but he might have lost the key or had it stolen from him. Then there is the gardener. He has been here many years. One of the younger servants may have a lover. It is easy to take an impression of a key and have one cut. There are many possibilities. Then there is another person who, I should judge, is exceedingly likely to have such a thing in her keeping." "Who is that?" "Madame Daubreuil," said the detective dryly. "Eh, said the magistrate, his face falling a little. "So you have heard about that, have you?" "I hear everything," said Giraud imperturbably. "There is one thing I could swear you have not heard," said Monsieur Hotet. delighted to be able to show superior knowledge, and without more ado, he retold the story of the mysterious visitor the night before. He also touched on the check made out to Devine, and finally handed Giraud the letter signed Bella. Giraud listened in silence, studied the letter attentively, and then handed it back. "All very interesting, Monsieur le Juge, but my theory remains unaffected." "And your theory is?" "For the moment, I prefer not to say. Remember, I am only just beginning my investigations." "Tell me one thing, Monsieur Giraud," said Poirot suddenly. "Your theory allows for the door being opened. It does not explain why it was left open. When they departed, would it not have been natural for them to close it behind them? If a Sergeant Deville had chanced to come up to the house, as is sometimes done to see that all is well, they might have been discovered and overtaken almost at once. Bah! They forgot it. A mistake, I grant you." Then, to my surprise, Poirot uttered almost the same words as he had uttered to Bex the previous evening. "I do not agree with you. The door being left open was the result of either design or necessity, and any theory that does not admit that fact is bound to prove vain." We all regarded the little man with a good deal of astonishment. The confession of ignorance drawn from him over the match-end had, I thought, been bound to humiliate him, but here he was, self-satisfied as ever, laying down the law to the great Giraud without a tremor. The detective twisted his mustache, eyeing my friend in a somewhat bantering fashion. "You don't agree with me, eh? Well, what strikes you particularly about the case? Let's hear your views. One thing presents itself to me as being significant. Tell me, Monsieur Giraud, does nothing strike you as familiar about this case? Is there nothing it reminds you of?" "Familiar? Reminds me of? I can't say offhand. I don't think so, though." "You are wrong," said Poirot quietly. "A crime almost precisely similar has been committed before." "When? And where?" "Ah, that, unfortunately, I cannot for the moment remember, but I shall do so. I had hoped you might be able to assist me." Giraud snorted incredulously. "There have been many affairs of masked men. I cannot remember the details of them all. These crimes all resemble each other more or less. There is such a thing as the individual touch." Poirot suddenly assumed his lecturing manner and addressed us collectively. "I am speaking to you now of the psychology of crime. Monsieur Giraud knows quite well that each criminal has his particular method, and that the police, when called in to investigate, say a case of burglary, can often make a shrewd guess at the offender, simply by the peculiar method he has employed. Man is an unoriginal animal. Unoriginal within the law in his daily respectable life, equally unoriginal outside the law. If a man commits a crime, any other crime he commits will resemble it closely. The English murderer who disposed of his wives in succession by drowning them in their baths was a case in point. Had he varied his methods, he might have escaped detection to this day. But he obeyed the common dictates of human nature, arguing that what had once succeeded would succeed again, and he paid the penalty of his lack of originality. "And the point of all this," sneered Giraud, "that when you have two crimes precisely similar in design and execution, you find the same brain behind them both. I am looking for that brain, Monsieur Giraud, and I shall find it. Here we have a true clue, a psychological clue. You may know all about cigarettes and match ends, Monsieur Giraud, but I, Hercule Poirot, know the mind of man." And the ridiculous little fellow tapped his forehead with emphasis. Giraud remained singularly unimpressed. "For your guidance," continued Poirot, "I will also advise you of one fact which might fail to be brought to your notice. The wristwatch of Madame Renauld, on the day following the tragedy, had gained 2 hours. It might interest you to examine it." Giraud stared. "Perhaps it was in the habit of gaining? As a matter of fact, I am told it did." "Eh bien, then. All the same, 2 hours is a good deal," said Poirot softly. Then there is the matter of the footprints in the flower bed. He nodded his head towards the open window. Giraud took 2 eager strides and looked out. This bed here? Yes. But I see no footprints. No, said Poirot, straightening a little pile of books on a table. There are none. For a moment, an almost murderous rage obscured Giraud's face. He took 2 strides towards his tormentor, but at that moment, the drawing-room door was opened, and Marchaud announced, Monsieur Stonor, the secretary, has just arrived from England. May he enter? Chapter 10. Gabriel Stonor. The man who entered the room was a striking figure. Very tall, with a well-built athletic frame and a deeply bronzed face and neck, he dominated the assembly. Even Giraud seemed anemic beside him. When I got to know him better, I realized that Gabriel Stonor was quite an unusual personality. English by birth, he had knocked about all over the world. He had shot big game in Africa, traveled in Korea, ranched in California, and traded in the South Sea Islands. He had been secretary to a New York railway magnate and had spent a year encamped in the desert with a friendly tribe of Arabs. His unerring eye picked out Monsieur Houtet, the examining magistrate in charge of the case. Pleased to meet you, Monsieur le Juge. This is a terrible business. How's Mrs. Renauld? Is she bearing up fairly well? It must have been an awful shock to her. Terrible, terrible, said Monsieur Houtet. Permit me to introduce Monsieur Bex, our commissary of police, Monsieur Giraud of the Charite. This gentleman is Monsieur Hercule Poirot. Monsieur Renauld sent for him, but he arrived too late to do anything to avert the tragedy. A friend of Monsieur Poirot's, Captain Hastings. Stonor looked at Poirot with some interest. Sent for you, did he? You did not know, then, that Monsieur Renauld contemplated calling in a detective? Interposed Monsieur Bex. No, I didn't. But it doesn't surprise me a bit. Why? Because the old man was rattled. I don't know what it was all about. He didn't confide in me. We weren't on those terms. But rattled he was, and badly. Hum, said Monsieur Houtet. But you have no notion of the cause? That's what I said, sir. You will pardon me, Monsieur Stonor, but we must begin with a few formalities. Your name? Gabriel Stonor. How long ago was it that you became secretary to Monsieur Renauld? About 2 years ago, when he first arrived from South America. I met him through a mutual friend, and he offered me the post. A thundering good boss he was, too. Did he talk to you much about his life in South America? Yes, a good bit. Do you know if he was ever in Santiago? Several times, I believe. He never mentioned any special incident that occurred there, anything that might have provoked some vendetta against him? Never. Did he speak of any secret that he had acquired whilst sojourning there? No. Did he ever say anything at all about a secret? Not that I can remember. But, for all that, there was a mystery about him. I've never heard him speak of his boyhood, for instance, or of any incident prior to his arrival in South America. He was a French-Canadian by birth, I believe, but I've never heard him speak of his life in Canada. He could shut up like a clam if he liked. So, as far as you know, he had no enemies, and you can give us no clue as to any secret to obtain possession of which he might have been murdered? That's so. Monsieur Stonor, have you ever heard the name of Duveen in connection with Monsieur Renauld? Duveen. Duveen. He thought the name over thoughtfully. I don't think I have, and yet it seems familiar. Do you know a lady, a friend of Monsieur Renaud's, whose Christian name is Bella? Again, Mr. Stonor shook his head. Bella Duveen? Is that the full name? It's curious. I'm sure I know it. But for the moment, I can't remember in what connection. The magistrate coughed. You understand, Monsieur Stonor, the case is like this. There must be no reservations. You might, perhaps, through a feeling of consideration for Madame Renauld, for whom, I gather, you have a great esteem and affection, you might, enfin, said Monsieur Hotet, getting rather tied up in his sentence. There must absolutely be no reservations. Stonor stared at him, a dawning light of comprehension in his eyes. I don't quite get you, he said gently. Where does Mrs. Renauld come in? I've an immense respect and affection for that lady. She's a very wonderful and unusual type, but I don't quite see how my reservations, or otherwise, could affect her. Not if this Bella Devine should prove to have been something more than a friend to her husband? Ah, said Stonor. I get you now. But I'll bet my bottom dollar that you're wrong. The old man never so much as looked at a petticoat. He just adored his own wife. They were the most devoted couple I know. Monsieur Hotet shook his head gently. Monsieur Stonor, we hold absolute proof, a love letter written by this Bella to Monsieur Renauld, accusing him of having tired of her. Moreover, we have further proof that, at the time of his death, he was carrying on an intrigue with a Frenchwoman, a Madame Daubreuil, who rents the adjoining villa. And this is the man who, according to you, never looked at a petticoat. The secretary's eyes narrowed. Hold on, Monsieur le Juge. You're barking up the wrong tree. I knew Paul Renauld. What you've just been saying is utterly impossible. There's some other explanation. The magistrate shrugged his shoulders. What other explanation could there be? What leads you to think it was a love affair? Madame Daubreuil was in the habit of visiting him here in the evenings. Also, since Monsieur Renauld came to the Villa Geneviève, Madame Daubreuil has paid large sums of money into the bank in notes. In all, the amount totals £4,000 of your English money. I guess that's right, said Stonor quietly. I transmitted him those sums at his request. But it wasn't an intrigue. Mon Dieu, what else could it be? Blackmail, said Stonor sharply, bringing down his hand with a slam on the table. That's what it was. Ah, voilà une idée, cried the magistrate, shaken in spite of himself. Blackmail, repeated Stonor. The old man was being bled, and at a good rate too. 4,000 in a couple of months. Phew! I told you just now there was a mystery about Renauld. Evidently, this Madame Daubreuil knew enough of it to put the screws on. It is possible, the commissary cried excitedly. Decidedly, it is possible. Possible, roared Stonor. It's certain. Tell me, have you asked Mrs. Renauld about this love affair stunt of yours? No, monsieur. We did not wish to cause her any distress if it could reasonably be avoided. Distress? Why, she'd laugh in your face. I tell you, she and Renauld were a couple in 100. Ah, that reminds me of another point, said Monsieur Hotet. Did Monsieur Renauld take you into his confidence at all as to the dispositions of his will? I know all about it. Took it to the lawyer for him after he'd drawn it out. I can give you the name of his solicitors if you want to see it. They've got it there. Quite simple. Half in trust to his wife for her lifetime, the other half to his son. A few legacies. I rather think he left me 1,000. When was this will drawn up? Oh, about a year and a half ago. Would it surprise you very much, Monsieur Stonor, to hear that Monsieur Renauld had made another will, less than a fortnight ago? Stonor was obviously very much surprised. I'd no idea. What's it like? The whole of his vast fortune is left unreservedly to his wife. There is no mention of his son. Mr. Stonor gave vent to a prolonged whistle. I call that rather rough on the lad. His mother adores him, of course, but to the world at large, it looks rather like a want of confidence on his father's part. It will be rather galling to his pride. Still, it all goes to prove what I told you, that Renauld and his wife were on first-rate terms. Quite so, said Monsieur Hautet. "It is possible we shall have to revise our ideas on several points. We have, of course, cabled to Santiago, and are expecting a reply from there any minute. In all possibility, everything will then be perfectly clear and straightforward. On the other hand, if your suggestion of blackmail is true, Madame Daubreuil ought to be able to give us valuable information." Poirot interjected a remark. "Monsieur Stonor, the English chauffeur, masters, had he been long with Monsieur Renauld?" "Over a year." "Have you any idea whether he has ever been to South America?" "I'm quite sure he hasn't. Before coming to Mr. Renauld, he had been for many years with some people in Gloucestershire whom I know well. In fact, you can answer for him as being above suspicion?" "Absolutely." Poirot seemed somewhat crestfallen. Meanwhile, the magistrate had summoned Marchaud. "My compliments to Madame Renauld, and I should be glad to speak to her for a few minutes. Beg her not to disturb herself. I will wait for her upstairs." Marchaud saluted and disappeared. We waited some minutes, and then, to our surprise, the door opened, and Mrs. Renauld, deathly pale in her heavy mourning, entered the room. Monsieur Hautet brought forward a chair, uttering vigorous protestations, and she thanked him with a smile. Stonor was holding one of her hands in his with an eloquent sympathy. Words evidently failed him. Mrs. Renauld turned to Monsieur Hautet. "You wished to ask me something, Monsieur le Juge." "With your permission, madame. I understand your husband was a French-Canadian by birth. Can you tell me anything of his youth or upbringing?" She shook her head. "My husband was always very reticent about himself, monsieur. He came from the northwest, I know, but I fancy that he had an unhappy childhood, for he never cared to speak of that time. Our life was lived entirely in the present and the future." "Was there any mystery in his past life?" Mrs. Renauld smiled a little and shook her head. "Nothing so romantic, I am sure, Monsieur le Juge." Monsieur Hautet also smiled. "True, we must not permit ourselves to get melodramatic. There is one thing more." He hesitated. Stonor broke in impetuously. "They've got an extraordinary idea into their heads, Mrs. Renauld. They actually fancy that Mr. Renauld was carrying on an intrigue with a Madame Daubreuil who, it seems, lives next door." A scarlet color flamed into Mrs. Renaud's cheeks. She flung her head up, then bit her lip, her face quivering. Stonor stood looking at her in astonishment, but Monsieur Bex leaned forward and said gently, "We regret to cause you pain, madam, but do you have any reason to believe that Madame Daubreuil was your husband's mistress?" With a sob of anguish, Mrs. Renauld buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders heaved convulsively. At last, she lifted her head and said brokenly, "She may have been. Never, in all my life, have I seen anything to equal the blank amazement on Stonor's face. He was thoroughly taken aback." Chapter 11. Jack Renauld. What the next development of the conversation would have been, I cannot say, for at that moment the door was thrown violently open, and a tall young man strode into the room. Just for a moment, I had the uncanny sensation that the dead man had come to life again. Then I realized that this dark head was untouched with gray, and that, in point of fact, it was a mere boy who now burst in among us with so little ceremony. He went straight to Mrs. Renauld with an impetuosity that took no heed of the presence of others. "Mother! Jack!" With a cry she folded him in her arms. "My dearest! But what brings you here? You were to sail on the Anzora from Cherbourg 2 days ago." Then, suddenly recalling the presence of others, she turned with a certain dignity. "My son, messrs." "Aha!" said Monsieur Hautet, acknowledging the young man's bow. "So you did not sail on the Anzora?" "No, monsieur. As I was about to explain, the Anzora was detained 24 hours through engine trouble. I should have sailed last night instead of the night before, but, happening to buy an evening paper, I saw in it an account of the the awful tragedy that had befallen us. His voice broke and tears came into his eyes. My poor father! My poor, poor father! Staring at him like one in a dream, Mrs. Renauld repeated, So you did not sail? And then, with a gesture of infinite weariness, she murmured as though to herself, After all, it does not matter, now. Sit down, Monsieur Renauld, I beg of you, said Monsieur Hotet, indicating a chair. My sympathy for you is profound. It must have been a terrible shock to you to learn the news as you did. However, it is most fortunate that you were prevented from sailing. I am in hopes that you may be able to give us just the information we need to clear up this mystery. I am at your disposal, Monsieur le Juge. Ask me any questions you please. To begin with, I understand that this journey was being undertaken at your father's request? Quite so, Monsieur le Juge. I received a telegram bidding me to proceed without delay to Buenos Aires, and from thence via the Andes to Valparaiso and on to Santiago. Ah, and the object of this journey? I have no idea, Monsieur le Juge. What? No. See, here is the telegram. The magistrate took it and read it aloud. Proceed immediately Cherbourg, Embark and Zora sailing tonight Buenos Aires. Ultimate destination Santiago. Further instructions will await you in Buenos Aires. Do not fail. Matter is of utmost importance. Renauld. And there had been no previous correspondence on the matter. Jack Renauld shook his head. That is the only intimation of any kind. I knew, of course, that my father, having lived so long out there, had necessarily many interests in South America. But he had never mooted any suggestion of sending me out. You have, of course, been a good deal in South America, Monsieur Renauld? I was there as a child, but I was educated in England, and spent most of my holidays in that country, so I really know far less of South America than might be supposed. You see, the war broke out when I was 17. You served in the English Flying Corps, did you not? Yes, Monsieur le Juge. Monsieur Hotet nodded his head and proceeded with his inquiries along the, by now, well-known lines. In response, Jack Renauld declared definitely that he knew nothing of any enmity his father might have incurred in the city of Santiago, or elsewhere in the South American continent, that he had noticed no change in his father's manner of late, and that he had never heard him refer to a secret. He had regarded the mission to South America as connected with business interests. As Monsieur Hotet paused for a minute, the quiet voice of Giraud broke in. I should like to put a few questions on my own account, Monsieur le Juge. By all means, Monsieur Giraud, if you wish, said the magistrate coldly. Giraud edged his chair a little nearer to the table. Were you on good terms with your father, Monsieur Renauld? Certainly I was, returned the lad haughtily. You assert that positively? Yes. No little disputes, eh? Jack shrugged his shoulders. Everyone may have a difference of opinion now and then. Quite so, quite so. But if anyone were to assert that you had a violent quarrel with your father on the eve of your departure for Paris, that person, without doubt, would be lying. I could not but admire the ingenuity of Giraud. His boast, I know everything, had been no idle one. Jack Renauld was clearly disconcerted by the question. We did have an argument, he admitted. Ah, an argument. In the course of that argument did you use this phrase, when you are dead, I can do as I please? I may have done, muttered the other. I don't know. In response to that, did your father say, but I am not dead yet? To which you responded, I wish you were. The boy gave no answer. His hands fiddled nervously with the things on the table in front of him. I must request an answer, please, Monsieur Renauld, said Giraud sharply. With an angry exclamation, the boy swept a heavy paper knife onto the floor. What does it matter? You might as well know. Yes, I did quarrel with my father. I dare say I said all those things. I was so angry I cannot even remember what I said. I was furious. I could almost have killed him at that moment. There, make the most of that. He leaned back in his chair, flushed and defiant. Giraud smiled, then, moving his chair back a little, said, "That is all. You would, without doubt, prefer to continue the interrogatory, Monsieur le Juge." "Ah, yes, exactly," said Monsieur Hautet. "And what was the subject of your quarrel?" "I decline to state." Monsieur Hautet sat up in his chair. "Monsieur Renauld, it is not permitted to trifle with the law," he thundered. "What was the subject of the quarrel?" Young Renauld remained silent, his boyish face sullen and overcast. But another voice spoke, imperturbable and calm, the voice of Hercule Poirot. "I will inform you, Monsieur le Juge, if you like, Monsieur le Juge." "You know." "Certainly, I know." The subject of the quarrel was Mademoiselle Martha Daubreuil. Renauld sprang around, startled. The magistrate leaned forward. "Is this so, monsieur?" Jacques Renauld bowed his head. "Yes," he admitted. "I love Mademoiselle Daubreuil, and I wish to marry her." When I informed my father of the fact, he flew at once into a violent rage. Naturally, I could not stand hearing the girl I loved insulted, and I, too, lost my temper. Monsieur Hautet looked across at Mrs. Renauld. "You were aware of this attachment, madame?" "I feared it," she replied simply. "Mother," cried the boy. "You too. Martha is as good as she is beautiful. What can you have against her?" "I have nothing against Mademoiselle Daubreuil in any way. But I would prefer you to marry an Englishwoman, or if a Frenchwoman, not one who has a mother of doubtful antecedents." Her rancor against the older woman showed plainly in her voice, and I could well understand that it must have been a bitter blow to her when her only son showed signs of falling in love with the daughter of her rival. Mrs. Renauld continued, addressing the magistrate. "I ought, perhaps, to have spoken to my husband on the subject, but I hoped that it was only a boy and girl flirtation which would blow over all the quicker if no notice was taken of it. I blame myself now for my silence, but my husband, as I told you, had seemed so anxious and careworn, different altogether from his normal self, that I was chiefly concerned not to give him any additional worry." Monsieur Hautet nodded. "When you informed your father of your intentions towards Mademoiselle Daubreuil," he resumed, "he was surprised?" "He seemed completely taken aback. Then he ordered me peremptorily to dismiss any such idea from my mind. He would never give his consent to such a marriage." Nettled, I demanded what he had against Mademoiselle Daubreuil. To that he could give no satisfactory reply, but spoke in slighting terms of the mystery surrounding the lives of the mother and daughter. I answered that I was marrying Martha, and not her antecedents, but he shouted me down with a peremptory refusal to discuss the matter in any way. The whole thing must be given up. The injustice and high-handedness of it all maddened me, especially since he himself always seemed to go out of his way to be attentive to the Daubreuils and was always suggesting that they should be asked to the house. I lost my head, and we quarreled in earnest. My father reminded me that I was entirely dependent on him, and it must have been in answer to that I made the remark about doing as I pleased after his death. Poirot interrupted with a quick question. "You were aware, then, of the terms of your father's will?" "I knew that he had left half his fortune to me, the other half in trust for my mother to come to me at her death," replied the lad. "Proceed with your story," said the magistrate. "After that we shouted at each other in sheer rage, until I suddenly realized that I was in danger of missing my train to Paris. I had to run for the station, still in a white heat of fury. However, once well away, I calmed down. I wrote to Martha, telling her what had happened, and her reply soothed me still further. She pointed out to me that we had only to be steadfast, and any opposition was bound to give way at last. Our affection for each other must be tried and proved, and when my parents realized that it was no light infatuation on my part, they would doubtless relent towards us. Of course, to her, I had not dwelt on my father's principal objection to the match. I soon saw that I should do my cause no good by violence. My father wrote me several letters to Paris, affectionate in tone, and which did not refer to our disagreement or its cause, and I replied in the same tone. "You can produce those letters, said Giraud. "I did not keep them." "No matter," said the detective. Renauld looked at him for a moment, but the magistrate was continuing his questions. "To pass to another matter, are you acquainted with the name of Duveen, Monsieur Renauld?" "Duveen," said Jack. "Duveen." He leaned forward, and slowly picked up the paper knife he had swept from the table. As he lifted his head, his eyes met the watching ones of Giraud. "Duveen? No, I can't say I am. Will you read this letter, Monsieur Renauld, and tell me if you have any idea as to who the person was who addressed it to your father?" Jack Renauld took the letter, and read it through, the color mounting in his face as he did so. "Addressed to my father?" The emotion and indignation in his tones were evident. "Yes. We found it in the pocket of his coat." "Does—" He hesitated, throwing the merest fraction of a glance towards his mother. The magistrate understood. "As yet, no. Can you give us any clue as to the writer?" "I have no idea whatsoever." Monsieur Hautet sighed. "A most mysterious case. Ah, well, I suppose we can now rule out the letter altogether. What do you think, Monsieur Giraud? It does not seem to lead us anywhere." "It certainly does not," agreed the detective with emphasis. "And yet," sighed the magistrate, "it promised at the beginning to be such a beautiful and simple case." He caught Mrs. Renaud's eye, and blushed in immediate confusion. "Ah, yes," he coughed, turning over the papers on the table. "Let me see, where were we? Oh, the weapon. I fear this may give you pain, Monsieur Renauld. I understand it was a present from you to your mother. Very sad, very distressing." Jack Renauld leaned forward. His face, which had flushed during the perusal of the letter, was now deadly white. "Do you mean that it was with an aeroplane wire paper cutter that my father was killed? But it's impossible. A little thing like that. Alas, Monsieur Renauld, it is only too true. An ideal little tool, I fear. Sharp and easy to handle. Where is it? Can I see it? Is it still in the body?" "Oh no, it had been removed." "You would like to see it? To make sure?" "It would be as well, perhaps, though Madame has already identified it. Still, Monsieur Bex, might I trouble you?" "Certainly, Monsieur le Juge. I will fetch it immediately." "Would it not be better to take Monsieur Renauld to the shed?" suggested Giraud smoothly. Without doubt, he would wish to see his father's body. The boy made a shivering gesture of negation, and the magistrate, always disposed to cross Giraud whenever possible, replied, "But no, not at present. Monsieur Bex will be so kind as to bring it to us here." The commissary left the room. Stonor crossed to Jack, and wrung him by the hand. Poirot had risen, and was adjusting a pair of candlesticks that struck his trained eye as being a shade askew. The magistrate was reading the mysterious love letter one last time, clinging desperately to his first theory of jealousy and a stab in the back. Suddenly the door burst open, and the commissary rushed in. "Monsieur le Juge! Monsieur le Juge! But yes. What is it?" "The dagger. It is gone." "Comment, gone. Vanished. Disappeared. The glass jar that contained it is empty." "What?" I cried. "Impossible." "Why, only this morning I saw—" The words died on my tongue, but the attention of the entire room was diverted to me. "What is that you say?" cried the commissary. "This morning. "I saw it there this morning," I said slowly. "About an hour and a half ago, to be accurate." "You went to the shed, then? How did you get the key?" "I asked the sergeant de ville for it." "And you went there? Why?" I hesitated, but in the end I decided that the only thing to do was to make a clean breast of it. "Monsieur le Juge," I said, "I have committed a grave fault, for which I must crave your indulgence." "Eh bien. Proceed, monsieur." "The fact of the matter is," I said, wishing myself anywhere else than where I was, "that I met a young lady, an acquaintance of mine. She displayed a great desire to see everything that was to be seen, and well, in short, I took the key to show her the body." "Ah, par exemple!" cried the magistrate indignantly. "But it is a grave fault you have committed there, Captain Hastings. It is altogether most irregular. You should not have permitted yourself this folly." "I know," I said meekly. "Nothing that you can say could be too severe, Monsieur le Juge. You did not invite this lady to come here?" "Certainly not. I met her quite by accident. She is an English lady who happens to be staying in Merlinville, though I was not aware of that until my unexpected meeting with her." "Well, well," said the magistrate, softening. "It was most irregular, but the lady is without doubt young and beautiful, and see pas? What it is to be young! Oh, jeunesse, jeunesse!" And he sighed sentimentally. But the commissary, less romantic and more practical, took up the tale. "But did not you recluse and lock the door when you departed?" "That's just it," I said slowly. "That's what I blame myself for so terribly. My friend was upset at the sight. She nearly fainted. I got her some brandy and water, and afterwards insisted on accompanying her back to town. In the excitement, I forgot to relock the door. I only did so when I got back to the villa. Then for 20 minutes at least," said the commissary slowly. He stopped. "Exactly," I said. 20 minutes, mused the commissary. "It is deplorable," said Monsieur Hotet, his sternness of manner returning. "Without precedent." Suddenly another voice spoke. "You find it deplorable, Monsieur le Juge?" asked Giraud. "Certainly I do." "Eh bien. I find it admirable," said the other imperturbably. This unexpected ally quite bewildered me. "Admirable, Monsieur Giraud?" asked the magistrate, studying him cautiously out of the corner of his eye. "Precisely." "And why?" "Because we know now that the assassin, or an accomplice of the assassin, has been near the villa only an hour ago. It will be strange if, with that knowledge, we do not shortly lay hands upon him." There was a note of menace in his voice. He continued, "He risked a good deal to gain possession of that dagger. Perhaps he feared that fingerprints might be discovered on it." Poirot turned to Bex. "You said there were none?" Giraud shrugged his shoulders. Perhaps he could not be sure. Poirot looked at him. "You are wrong, Monsieur Giraud. The assassin wore gloves. So he must have been sure. I do not say it was the assassin himself. It may have been an accomplice who was not aware of that fact." "Ils sont mal renseignés, les accomplices," muttered Poirot, but he said no more. The magistrate's clerk was gathering up the papers on the table. Monsieur Hotet addressed us. "Our work here is finished. Perhaps, Monsieur Renauld, you will listen whilst your evidence is read over to you. I have purposely kept all the proceedings as informal as possible. I have been called original in my methods, but I maintain that there is much to be said for originality. The case is now in the clever hands of the renowned Monsieur Giraud. He will, without doubt, distinguish himself. Indeed, I wonder if he has not already laid his hands upon the murderers. Madam, again let me assure you of my heartfelt sympathy. Messrs, I wish you all good day." And, accompanied by his clerk and the commissary, he took his departure. Poirot tugged out that large turnip of a watch of his, and observed the time. "Let us return to the hotel for lunch, my friend," he said, "and you shall recount to me in full the indiscretions of this morning. No one is observing us. We need make no adieus." We went quietly out of the room. The examining magistrate had just driven off in his car. I was going down the steps when Poirot's voice arrested me. "One little moment, my friend." Dexterously, he whipped out his yard measure, and proceeded, quite solemnly, to measure an overcoat hanging in the hall from the collar to the hem. I had not seen it hanging there before, and guessed that it belonged to either Mr. Stonor or Jack Renauld. Then, with a little satisfied grunt, Poirot returned the measure to his pocket, and followed me out into the open air. Chapter 12. Poirot elucidates certain points. "Why did you measure that overcoat?" I asked with some curiosity, as we walked at a leisurely pace down the hot white road. "Parbleu! To see how long it was," replied my friend, imperturbably. I was vexed. Poirot's incurable habit of making a mystery out of nothing never failed to irritate me. I fell silent, following my own train of thought. Although I hadn't noticed them specially at the time, certain words Mrs. Renauld had addressed to her son now recurred to me, fraught with new significance. "So you did not sail," she had said, and then added, "After all, it does not matter, now." What had she meant? The words were enigmatic, significant. Was it possible that she knew more than we supposed? She had denied all knowledge of the mysterious mission her husband was to have entrusted to his son. But was she really less ignorant than she pretended? Could she enlighten us if she chose? And was her silence part of a carefully thought-out, preconceived plan? The more I considered it, the more convinced I was that I was right. Mrs. Renauld knew more than she chose to tell. In her surprise at seeing her son, she had momentarily betrayed herself. I felt certain that she knew, if not the assassins, at least the motive for the assassination. But some very powerful considerations must be keeping her silent. "You think profoundly, my friend," remarked Poirot, interrupting my reflections. "What is it that so intrigues you?" I told him, sure of my ground, yet expecting him to ridicule my suspicions. But to my surprise, he nodded thoughtfully. "You are quite right, Hastings. From the beginning, I have been sure that she was keeping something back. At first, I suspected her, if not of inspiring, at least of condoning the crime." "You suspected her?" I cried. "But certainly. She benefits enormously. In fact, by this new will, she is the only person to benefit. So, from the start, she was singled out for attention. You may have noticed that I took an early opportunity to examine her wrists. I wished to see whether there was any possibility that she had gagged and bound herself. Eh bien, I saw at once that there was no deception. The cords had actually been drawn so tight as to cut into the flesh. That ruled out the possibility of her having committed the crime single-handed. But it was still possible for her to have condoned it, or to have been the instigator with an accomplice. Moreover, the story as she told it was singularly familiar to me. The masked men she could not recognize, the mention of the secret. I had heard or read all these things before. Another little detail confirmed my belief that she was not speaking the truth. The wristwatch, Hastings, the wristwatch. Again that wristwatch. Poirot was eyeing me curiously. "You see, mon ami? You comprehend." "No," I replied with some ill humor. "I neither see nor comprehend. You make all these confounded mysteries, and it's useless asking you to explain. You always like keeping everything up your sleeve until the last minute." "Do not enrage yourself, my friend," said Poirot with a smile. "I will explain if you wish. But not a word to Giraud, c'est entendu? He treats me as an old man of no importance." "We shall see. In common fairness, I gave him a hint. If he does not choose to act upon it, That is his own lookout. I assured Poirot that he could rely upon my discretion. C'est bien. Let us then employ our little grey cells. Tell me, my friend, at what time, according to you, did the tragedy take place? Why, at 2 o'clock or thereabouts, I said, astonished. You remember, Mrs. Renauld told us that she heard the clock strike while the men were in the room. Exactly. And on the strength of that, you, the examining magistrate, Bex, and everyone else, accept the time without further question. But I, Hercule Poirot, say that Madame Renauld lied. The crime took place at least 2 hours earlier. But the doctors, they declared, after examination of the body, that death had taken place between 10 and 7 hours previously. Mon ami, for some reason, it was imperative that the crime should seem to have taken place later than it actually did. You have read of a smashed watch or clock recording the exact hour of a crime. So that the time should not rest on Mrs. Renauld's testimony alone, someone moved the hands of that wristwatch to 2 o'clock, and then dashed it violently to the ground. But, as is often the case, they defeated their own objective. The glass was smashed, but the mechanism of the watch was uninjured. It was a most disastrous maneuver on their part, for it at once drew my attention to 2 points. First, that Madame Renauld was lying. Secondly, that there must be some vital reason for the postponement of the time. But what reason could there be? Ah, that is the question. There we have the whole mystery. As yet, I cannot explain it. There is only one idea that presents itself to me as having a possible connection, and that is, the last train left Merlinville at 17 minutes past 12. I followed his reasoning slowly, so that, with the crime apparently taking place some 2 hours later, anyone leaving by that train would have an unimpeachable alibi. Perfect, Hastings. You have it. I sprang up. But we must inquire at the station. Surely they cannot have failed to notice 2 foreigners who left by that train. We must go there at once. You think so, Hastings? Of course. Let us go there now. Poirot restrained my ardor with a light touch upon my arm. Go by all means if you wish, mon ami. But if you go, I should not ask for particulars of 2 foreigners. I stared, and he said rather impatiently, La, you don't believe all that rigmarole, do you? The masked men, and all the rest of cette histoire-là. His words took me so much aback that I hardly knew how to respond. He went on serenely. You heard me say to Giraud, did you not, that all the details of this crime were familiar to me? Eh bien, that presupposes one of 2 things. Either the brain that planned the first crime also planned this one, or else an account read of a cause célèbre unconsciously remained in our assassin's memory and prompted the details. I shall be able to pronounce definitively on that after. He broke off. I was revolving about sundry matters in my mind. But Mr. Renauld's letter? It distinctly mentions a secret and Santiago. Undoubtedly there was a secret in Monsieur Renauld's life. There can be no doubt of that. On the other hand, the word Santiago, to my mind, is a red herring, dragged continually across the track to put us off the scent. It is possible that it was used in the same way on Monsieur Renauld, to keep him from directing his suspicions into a quarter nearer at hand. Oh, be assured, Hastings, the danger that threatened him was not in Santiago. It was near at hand, in France. He spoke so gravely, and with such assurance, that I could not fail to be convinced. But I offered one final objection, and the match and cigarette end found near the body? What of them? A light of pure enjoyment lit up Poirot's face. Planted. Deliberately planted there for Giraud or one of his tribe to find. Ah, he is smart, Giraud. He can do his tricks. So can a good retriever dog. He comes in so pleased with himself. For hours he has crawled on his stomach. See what I have found, he says. And then again to me, what do you see here? Me, I answer with profound and deep truth. Nothing. And Giraud, The great Giraud, he laughs, he thinks to himself. Oh, that he is an imbecile, this old one. But we shall see. But my mind had reverted to the main facts. Then all this story of the masked men is false. What really happened? Poirot shrugged his shoulders. One person could tell us, Madame Renauld. But she will not speak. Threats and entreaties would not move her. A remarkable woman that, Hastings. I recognized as soon as I saw her that I had to deal with a woman of unusual character. At first, as I told you, I was inclined to suspect her of being concerned in the crime. Afterwards, I altered my opinion. What made you do that? Her spontaneous and genuine grief at the sight of her husband's body. I could swear that the agony in that cry of hers was genuine. Yes, I said thoughtfully. One cannot mistake these things. I beg your pardon, my friend. One can always be mistaken. Consider a great actress. Does not her acting of grief carry you away and impress you with its reality? No, however strong my own impression and belief, I needed other evidence before I allowed myself to be satisfied. The great criminal can be a great actor. I base my certainty in this case, not upon my own impression, but upon the undeniable fact that Mrs. Renauld actually fainted. I turned up her eyelids and felt her pulse. There was no deception. The swoon was genuine. Therefore, I was satisfied that her anguish was real and not assumed. Besides, a small additional point, not without interest, it was unnecessary for Mrs. Renauld to exhibit unrestrained grief. She had had one paroxysm on learning of her husband's death, and there would be no need for her to simulate another such a violent one on beholding his body. No, Mrs. Renauld was not her husband's murderess. But why has she lied? She lied about the wristwatch, she lied about the masked men, she lied about a third thing. Tell me, Hastings, what is your explanation of the open door? Well, I said, rather embarrassed, I suppose it was an oversight. They forgot to shut it. Poirot shook his head and sighed. That is Giraud's explanation. It does not satisfy me. There is a meaning behind that open door which for a moment I cannot fathom. I have an idea, I cried suddenly. À la bonne heure. Let us hear it. Listen. We are agreed that Mrs. Renaud's story is a fabrication. Is it not possible, then, that Mr. Renauld left the house to keep an appointment, possibly with a murderer, leaving the front door open for his return? But he did not return, and the next morning he is found, stabbed in the back. An admirable theory, Hastings, but for two facts which you have characteristically overlooked. In the first place, who gagged and bound Madame Renauld? And why on earth should they return to the house to do so? In the second place, no man on earth would go out to keep an appointment wearing his underclothes and an overcoat. There are circumstances in which a man might wear pajamas and an overcoat, but the other, never. True, I said, rather crestfallen. No, continued Poirot, we must look elsewhere for a solution to the open door mystery. One thing I am fairly sure of, they did not leave through the door. They left by the window. What? Precisely. But there were no footmarks in the flower bed underneath. No, and there ought to have been. Listen, Hastings. The gardener, Auguste, as you heard him say, planted both those beds the preceding afternoon. In one, there are plentiful impressions of his big hobnailed boots, in the other, none. You see, someone had passed that way, someone who, to obliterate their footprints, smoothed over the surface of the bed with a rake. Where did they get a rake? Where they got the spade and the gardening gloves, said Poirot impatiently. There is no difficulty about that. What makes you think that they left that way, though? Surely it is more probable that they entered by the window and left by the door. That is possible, of course. Yet I have a strong idea that they left by the window. I think you are wrong. Perhaps, mon ami. I mused. thinking over the new field of conjecture that Poirot's deductions had opened up to me. I recalled my wonder at his cryptic allusions to the flower-bed and the wristwatch. His remarks had seemed so meaningless at the moment, and now, for the first time, I realized how remarkably, from a few slight incidents, he had unraveled much of the mystery that surrounded the case. I paid a belated homage to my friend. As though he read my thoughts, he nodded sagely. Method, you comprehend. Method. Arrange your facts. Arrange your ideas. And if some little fact will not fit in, do not reject it but consider it closely. Though its significance escapes you, be sure that it is significant. In the meantime, I said, considering, although we know a great deal more than we did, we are no nearer to solving the mystery of who killed Mr. Renauld. No, said Poirot cheerfully. In fact, we are a great deal further off. The fact seemed to afford him such peculiar satisfaction that I gazed at him in wonder. He met my eye and smiled. But yes, it is better so. Before, there was at all events a clear theory as to how and by whose hands he met his death. Now that is all gone. We are in darkness. 100 conflicting points confuse and worry us. That is well. That is excellent. Out of confusion comes forth order. But if you find order to start with, if a crime seems simple and above board, eh bien, méfiez-vous. It is, how do you say it? Cooked. The great criminal is simple, but very few criminals are great. In trying to cover up their tracks, they invariably betray themselves. Ah, mon ami, I would that someday I could meet a really great criminal, one who commits his crime, and then does nothing. Even I, Hercule Poirot, might fail to catch such a one. But I had not followed his words. A light had burst upon me. Poirot. Mrs. Renauld. I see it now. She must be shielding somebody. From the quietness with which Poirot received my remark, I could see that the idea had already occurred to him. Yes, he said thoughtfully. Shielding someone, or screening someone. One of the two. I saw very little difference between the two words, but I developed my theme with a good deal of earnestness. Poirot maintained a strictly non-committal attitude, repeating, "It may be, yes, it may be. But as yet I do not know. There is something very deep underneath all this. You will see. Something very deep." Then, as we entered our hotel, he enjoined silence on me with a gesture.